Chapter 1. The broken latch Hercule Poirot sat in the plush leather seat of the first-class carriage, the late afternoon light dancing upon his waxed moustaches as though to accentuate every curl. The carriage rattled along the rails, the rhythmic click-clack lulling less disciplined minds into complacency, but not that of Poirot. His dark eyes, magnified through a perfect pince-nez, flicked from Hastings's anxious profile to the corridor window, where passing hedgerows raced by in a blur of emerald and gold. "Mon ami," Poirot murmured, fingertips lightly tracing the grain of his polished cane. A broken latch is not merely broken wood and iron. It is the preface to a story whispered in the dark, an invitation to probe where others see only a trifle. Hastings let out a reluctant sigh and folded his arms. "With respect, monsieur, I cannot recall any case in which a simple garden gate warranted your immediate attendance. Lady Winifred Chalmers could have summoned the local carpenter by daylight and avoided all this fuss." Poirot allowed himself a slight smile. And therein lies the enigma. Had she sought mundane repair, she would have requested ordinary assistance. Instead, she dispatches me in all haste, under cover of discretion, to investigate a latch broken from within her walled garden, yet with no soul claiming to have departed through that gate that fateful night. Silence, Hastings, is the culprit. Silence? Hastings frowned beneath his broad hat. How can silence break a latch? "Silence conceals intention," Poirot replied crisply. "Imagine a clandestine meeting beneath the moonlit boughs. A secret passed, a whisper exchanged. The visitor departs, forcing the latch to close behind, yet too hurriedly to leave the mechanism intact. A normal gate clicks into place. This one fails. It lies mangled, an unspoken confession of an exit, unrecorded by any eye or ear." Hastings stared at the polished wood floor of the carriage. "A secret meeting in Lady Chalmers's rose garden. It sounds fanciful." "Perhaps," Poirot conceded, "but the seemingly fanciful often masks a practical reality. We shall see." He rose and offered Hastings his hand as the train began to slow. "Come, Hastings, we alight at Wadden Station. From there, a carriage will bear us to Chalmers House. Remember, discretion is paramount. Lady Chalmers desires no scandal." Stepping onto the quiet platform, Poirot drew in a crisp breath and swept his gaze across the deserted station. The single carriage, painted coal black, its interior lined with soft blue cloth, stood ready, the coachman's expression impassive beneath a stiff top hat. Hastings helped stow their bags, then climbed aboard with an air of mild trepidation. Inside, the light was muted, the windows curtained to preserve privacy. As the coach rumbled away, Hastings leaned toward Poirot. "Tell me more of the invitation. What did Lady Chalmers say exactly?" Poirot produced a single card from his inner pocket, the gilt-edged note crisp in his hand. He unfolded it with care and recited its contents in a measured tone. "Monsieur Hercule Poirot. At midnight, the garden gate's latch at Chalmers House was discovered broken from within. No member of my household nor any guest admits to having exited that way. I fear discretion is the only safeguard against rumour. Pray come without delay or fanfare. I await you at dawn. Yours in confidence, Lady Winifred Chalmers." Hastings frowned at the card. No mention of any other oddity, No theft, no threat, only the latch itself. Exactly, replied Poirot, and that is the key. A solitary broken latch demands explanation. The question is, what passed through it, and by whom? They rattled along country lanes cloaked in mist, the silhouette of Chalmers House emerging at last through the early morning haze, an imposing Georgian manor with ivy climbing its stone walls. It stood surrounded by a formal garden, the wrought-iron gate at its entrance unmistakable beneath weathered paint. The carriage halted. The coachman opened the door without a word. Poirot stepped onto the gravel drive, took a polite bow toward the awaiting footman, and strode forward with measured steps. Hastings followed, casting curious glances at the mansion's grand façade. The footman conducted them through a side entrance into a wide conservatory, where palms and ferns thrived in humid splendour. Lady Winifred Chalmers stood waiting, her dark hair pinned to reveal a slender neck, her expression poised yet lined with evident concern. She wore a simple morning gown of dove grey, trimmed with lace that mirrored the frost-etched patterns on the conservatory windows. Her eyes flicked to Hastings with polite acknowledgment, then fixed on Poirot. "Monsieur Poirot," she began, inclining her head, "I am grateful you came so promptly." Poirot bowed in return. "Madam, the smallest mystery can prove the most telling. Pray describe the circumstances of the broken latch." Lady Chalmers led them through the conservatory and out onto a broad terrace paved in flagstones that still glimmered with dew. Beyond lay the walled garden, its beds neatly trimmed and its rose-bushes dormant, yet dignified in the chill air. She paused at the entrance, where a low iron gate stood open, its latch hanging twisted and contorted. She swept her gloved hand across the broken iron, careful not to disturb the twisted remains. "I discovered it at dawn. After a restless night, no one else could unlock this gate without the key, which is kept under my pillow. I awoke to the faintest creak, then heard nothing further. This morning I found the latch bent outward, as though someone forced it from the other side." Hastings knelt to inspect the gate, circling it warily. "The latch is indeed mangled, brute force rather than finesse, but I see no scratch marks on the paintwork of the wall or rust on the latch itself." Poirot watched Hastings's examination with keen interest. "A precise observation. The absence of wear suggests a single deliberate act. No repeated interference, no eager tampering, one swift action." Lady Chalmers pressed her lips together. "I fear someone entered and left no other sign, no footprints in the gravel, no trace of an illicit visitor." Poirot's gaze drifted across the carefully tended beds. "Madame, might I walk the perimeter with Captain Hastings? We shall look for the faintest trace, perhaps a dropped glove or an imprint in the soil." She inclined her head. "Of course. I will remain here, awaiting your report." She turned and retraced her steps toward the conservatory, leaving Poirot and Hastings alone in the garden's hush. Poirot straightened and inhaled the crisp air. "The silence is an accomplice, Hastings. Let us begin by examining the path along. The east wall, the furthest point from the house." They followed the low stone wall, feet crunching on the gravel path. Hastings paused, crouched, and traced lighter patches of soil with a gloved finger. "Here, see how the gravel is slightly disturbed? 3 stones are tipped, as though prodded." Poirot knelt, his cane set aside. He traced a slender line between the stones. An interesting find. The intruder stepped precisely here, applying weight to these stones, yet no disturbance beyond this spot. They must have vaulted over the lower wall, remarkable considering the height. Hastings struggled to estimate the wall's height. At least 5 feet. One does not scale such a barrier in proper attire. They would if secrecy demanded cloak and boots, Poirot said softly. Let us examine the base of the wall. Hastings, please look beneath for any smudged earth or damp patches. Hastings pressed his palm to the ground and found a narrow strip of dark soil, as though moisture had been transferred by a coat or a cloak dragging against the wall. Poirot's lips curved in satisfaction. The culprit brought a cloak, slipped it over the wall to snag the latch from within, then gathered it to depart. The broken iron is a by-product of hast, not malice. Now, Hastings, let us test the wall ourselves. Poirot brushed his coat aside, removed his hat, and placed it on a low stone buttress. With deceptive ease, he grasped the top of the wall and vaulted up, twisting to inspect the garden side of the gate. He returned moments later, his coat immaculate. Madame was correct. No footprints on the lawn's soft edge, no marks on the gate post. The intruder approached, slipped the cloak over to hook the latch, and applied downward pressure to force it open. A single motion, then the cloak whisked away. Ingenious. Hastings offered Poirot his hat. Well done, old friend. But what of motive? A broken latch explains method, but not why. Poirot replaced his hat and tapped his chin. Ah, Hastings, that is the question we shall pose to Lady Chalmers. A clandestine meeting? A stolen document tucked through her hedge? We must repair that latch, then enter the house. Over tea, the truth will reveal itself. They retraced their steps to the conservatory, leaving the broken gate to the early light. The lenses of glass behind them glinted as the sun rose higher, promising warmth, and beneath its brightness, the illumination of secrets long held in silence. And so, with deft heels and measured poise, Hercule Poirot prepared to unlock the first of many mysteries hidden within Chalmers' house. Chapter 2. The Locked Conservatory. Rain spattered against the tall glass panes of the conservatory as Hercule Poirot, Captain Hastings, and Lady Winifred Chalmers gathered beneath the arched foliage. The broken latch lay abandoned on a low marble pedestal, its iron twisted into curves that spoke of brute force. Now the rain washed away any lingering trace of the morning's footprints, leaving only the damp silence that weighed heavily in the enclosed space. Lady Chalmers, wrapped in a velvet shawl, motioned toward a wrought-iron table set for afternoon tea. "Please forgive the inconvenience," she said, her voice steady but edged with concern. "The house staff have prepared tea in here because the garden door must remain sealed until you have concluded your inspection." Poirot inclined his head politely and surveyed the fine china cups, the silver tea service, and the wicker basket of scones and petits fours. Hastings, standing nearby, frowned at the locked double doors that led back to the main corridor. The brass plaque read, "Conservatory." But the doors showed no sign of damage or tampering. "Madame," Poirot said, "it appears someone has taken great care to preserve the house's outward appearance. The gate in the garden was forced, but within these very walls, nothing so blatant as a broken window or a jar door disturbs the facade of propriety. This locked conservatory may hold its own secret. Lady Chalmers exchanged a glance with Hastings. I had thought nothing here could be closed off. Yet Mr. Thompson informed me that the corridor door leading here clicked shut last night, and that no one else used this passage. Hastings stepped to the door and rattled the handle. Indeed, it's bolted on the inside, of course. Only those with a key or who pull that lever may exit. Yet, if the latch was broken to admit someone, they did not leave through this entrance. Poirot moved to the far wall, studying the plants, orchids, ferns, and exotic palms that thrived in the steamy atmosphere. Madame, may I see the corridor door key? Lady Chalmers removed a small brass keychain from her reticule and handed it to him. He examined its 3 tags: front, garden, and conservatory. The conservatory key, he noted, bore a slight scratch along its warding. Ah, he murmured. Someone used this key in haste, perhaps borrowed from the bunch. But the scratch suggests a second key of the same design may exist, held by someone who did not wish to admit to opening this door. Hastings looked from the key to the broken garden latch displayed on the pedestal. So the intruder entered through the garden, then used the key to enter the house, but no one admits to holding that key. Poirot sipped his tea thoughtfully. Exactly. And the key's impostor scratched its twin in the lock, indicating a hurried effort to relock the door behind them. Now, Hastings, let us examine the hinges and frame here. Perhaps they show signs of a forced exit. They crouched to inspect the door's bottom hinge, brushing away the dampness that clung to the flagstone floor. Hastings's finger traced a faint smear of grass. Wet blades crushed against the stone. Poirot lifted a single frond of fern and found a slender green film on its tip. This plant's sap transfers readily, Poirot observed. The intruder likely brushed past the ferns on leaving, pressing against the door to slip the lock. The resulting smear is nearly invisible unless one looks closely. He dabbed a corner of his silk handkerchief against the handle and withdrew a faint green smudge. I shall test this later for botanical residue to confirm the species. Lady Chalmers, pacing, wrung her hands. But why enter here instead of using the hallway? This passage is less frequented, but it leads directly to my sitting room. The visitor could overhear private conversations, perhaps even intercept correspondence. Hastings strode to one of the glass cabinets that housed Lady Chalmers's orchid collection. Look at this, monsieur. The glass door of this cabinet is slightly ajar. These orchids require daily care, yet this door is left open just enough to slip one's hand inside. Poirot's brows rose. Aha! The intruder may have retrieved or planted something in this cabinet, something small enough to be concealed among the foliage. Note the soil on the shelf beneath, fresh grains that have fallen from recently rearranged pots. He knelt and brushed his gloved fingers across the shelf, collecting a speck of dark earth. If we analyze this soil, we may learn whether it matches the garden beds or an indoor greenhouse. Hastings drew a breath. So this is no random act of vandalism. Someone entered the garden, forced the latch, found their way through the conservatory door, and tampered with these plants, all in silence, leaving behind only torn foliage and faint smudges. Lady Chalmers's lips pressed together. I cannot imagine who among my household or any visitor would go to such lengths. We entertain only a handful of guests, and they left yesterday evening." Poirot stood, wiping his hands. "Madame, if you will permit, I should inspect the garden beds where these orchids originated. Meanwhile, Hastings and I must examine the conservatory thoroughly, including these locked cabinets." Lady Chalmers nodded. "Of course, I only ask that you be discreet. I wish no rumour spread of secret plants or mysterious visitors." Poirot tipped his head. "Discretion, madame, is the very art of concealment. We shall proceed quietly." He guided Hastings to the rows of exotic ferns and palms. Together they tested every handle, pressed each hidden catch, and noted the placement of every plant so as to detect any future disturbance. While they worked, Lady Chalmers retreated to the tea-table, pouring herself a cup of Darjeeling to calm her nerves. The conservatory fell into dappled shadows, the enormous leaves droning softly with the conservatory's humid breath. Beyond the glass, the garden lay sodden and still beneath the unrelenting rain. No footprints marred the gravel. No gateworker stood watch. Only the broken latch, displayed like evidence, reminded all that someone had passed through this tranquil place unobserved. After an hour's meticulous inspection, Poirot rejoined Lady Chalmers by the tea-table. Hastings followed, carrying a small leather-bound notebook. "I have noted several points of interest," Poirot said, drawing a finger across his moustache. "First, the conservatory key scratch implies a duplicate key held elsewhere. Second, the orchid cabinet was disturbed intentionally, likely as a hiding place or to retrieve a small concealed item. Third, the botanical residue on the door suggests the thief brushed against the ferns as they departed, but left no further trace. Finally, the broken garden latch was merely an entry point. The visitor avoided the main entrance to remain unseen." Then Chalmers sipped her tea, frowning. "And what does it all mean?" Poirot's eyes gleamed. "It means, madame, that your case is not one of mere mischief, but of deliberate concealment. Someone sought or hid something here, and in so doing forced the latch, picked the lock, and tampered with your orchids to distract suspicion. We must discover what was taken or left behind." Hastings leaned forward. "But what sort of item could be hidden in an orchid cabinet?" Poirot tapped his chin. "Something small. A letter, a medical vial, a key, perhaps even a photograph. We shall collect samples of the cabinet soil, examine the brass key, and then press Mrs. Smythe, your head housemaid, for further information. For now, madame, rest assured that the truth will emerge from the silence you so keenly feel." Lady Chalmers inclined her head, a flicker of hope returning to her dark eyes. "Thank you, Monsieur Poirot. I shall wait for your findings, and pray that this mystery remains confined to these walls." Poirot bowed. "Indeed, madam. And until the next creak or breaking of silence, we shall keep our little secret well guarded." Outside, the rain continued to patter, but within the conservatory the mystery stirred, its secrets awaiting the deft hands of Poirot's little grey cells to reveal them at last. Chapter 3. Secrets Beneath the Leaves. The morning after the conservatory, inspection dawned bright and crisp, as though nature herself wished to cleanse the air of yesterday's uneasy hush. Hercule Poirot rose early, his mind already turning over the subtle clues he had gathered. The scratched conservatory key, the disturbed orchid cabinet, and the faint botanical residue. He dressed with meticulous care, starched shirt, cravat knotted with precision, and a fine overcoat to ward off the dawn chill, before joining Captain Hastings in the breakfast room. Lady Winifred Chalmers awaited them at the long mahogany table, her dark hair swept back and eyes alert. A tray of porridge, eggs, and fresh toast steamed between them, but neither Hastings nor Poirot touched their food. Lady Chalmers poured tea for them, her hands steady despite the tension that lingered in the household. "Madame," Poirot began, raising his cup to his lips, "we must now investigate the source of that orchid cabinet soil. If it matches the garden beds, the intruder came straight from without. If it matches greenhouse soil, the culprit had access behind the scenes. I propose we visit the greenhouse immediately." Hastings nodded and questioned the head gardener, Mr. Llewellyn, about any unusual potting or soil transport last night. Chalmers set down her teacup. "Very well. I will have Mr. Thompson prepare the greenhouse key, and Mrs. Smythe will accompany you. She witnessed the cabinet disturbance in the conservatory and may recall details we overlooked." They rose and left the breakfast room, passing through the oak-panelled corridor to the service wing. Mrs. Smythe, head housemaid, met them at the door to the greenhouse, a splendid Victorian structure of iron and glass, warmed by coal-fired lamps and fragrant with steaming earth. The head gardener stood amid rows of potted ferns and orchids, his pruning shears poised in one hand. He looked up at their approach, surprise flickering across his lined face. "Monsieur Poirot, Captain Hastings, Lady Chalmers," he greeted, setting aside his tools. "I did not expect company so early. How may I assist?" Poirot produced the small porcelain dish containing the soil sample from the conservatory cabinet. "Monsieur, we require a comparison. Please show us your potting bench and the source soil you use for repotting orchids." The gardener led them to a corner bench strewn with peat moss sacks, small sacks of loam, and tin pans filled with fresh compost. Poirot examined each in turn, then knelt to inspect the floor. Damp footprints of booted shoes, as though someone had slipped past in the early hours. Captain Hastings traced the prints. "They're smaller than yours, Monsieur Poirot. More slender. Possibly a woman's boots." Mrs. Smythe's eyes widened. "I recall seeing Lady Chalmers's maid, Miss Foster, here late last evening. She collected a small tray of seedlings to water by the house lamp." Poirot rose, offering Hastings a glance. "Excellent observation. Monsieur Llewellyn, is Miss Foster permitted in the greenhouse after hours?" Llewellyn shook his head. "Not typically. She has a key for the conservatory, but that door does not lead directly here. She would need the greenhouse key, kept on Mr. Thompson's ring, or force open another entrance." Hastings stepped to the door's lockplate and examined it. "No scratch marks here. The key used must be genuine." Poirot nodded thoughtfully. So the intruder had access to Mr. Thompson's keys, or an exact duplicate. Now, let us compare the soil samples. With the gardener's help, Poirot placed the conservatory soil in one palm and a pinch of compost from the greenhouse bench in the other. He allowed his eyes to close as he inhaled their aromas. One, a sweet chalky scent of loam and orchid husks. The other, the subtle, earthy fragrance of garden bed topsoil. "Different origins," he declared. "The sample from the florist's cabinet is the formal garden soil, not greenhouse compost. Thus, the intruder carried that soil in on their person. Likely, on clothing or a tray, after disturbing the garden beds. They then brushed it into the cabinet to conceal their approach. He turned to Lady Chalmers. "Madame, this confirms the criminal came from the open garden, not from within the service areas." Lady Chalmers swallowed. But who could slip from the garden into the conservatory, fetch garden soil, and re-emerge without detection? Mrs. Smythe pulled a small notebook from her apron pocket. "I took note, madame, that last night the gardener's boy, young Phillips, did not finish his duties. He claimed he felt unwell and went to his quarters early, but I saw him lurking near the garden gate after midnight, carrying a covered tray." Hastings raised an eyebrow. "A tray, you say? Covered, no less. For what purpose?" "The tray was empty," Mrs. Smythe replied. "Yet I thought it odd he clutched it so carefully." Poirot's brilliant eyes gleamed. "Everything now falls into place. The tray was used to carry the orchids or soil from the garden into the conservatory. Young Phillips must have retrieved or hidden something among the plants, then fled without leaving overt signs." Llewellyn's face paled. Phillips has been acting strangely of late. Secretive, nervous. I dismissed it as youthful mischief. Poirot inclined his head. Youthful mischief can mask more serious motives. We must question Phillips at once and search his quarters for any further evidence. Perhaps a letter or an object stashed in the tray. Lady Chalmers signalled her assent. "I will fetch Mr. Thompson to assist. Please remain here as I return." She hurried away while Hastings and Poirot turned their attention to the greenhouse benches once more. The gardener watched them anxiously as Poirot tapped a gloved finger on the tray young Phillips had carried. "This tray, Hastings," Poirot said, "will show faint traces of the soil we found, and perhaps the sap of garden roses. We should agitate it under light to reveal any residual fragments." Hastings held the tray under the greenhouse lamp as Poirot examined its underside. Tiny flecks of orange petal and a smatter of green grit adhered to the rim. Poirot chuckled softly. A clear signature of rose garden soil. The culprit returned this tray to Phillips's quarters, hoping to mislead us into thinking the disturbance was in the greenhouse. Brilliant, but flawed. Footsteps approached, and Mr. Thompson appeared with Lady Chalmers and a constable. After brief introductions, Lady Chalmers explained her maid's observation. The constable nodded and set off to locate Phillips. Hastings and Poirot followed to the boys' quarters under the east wing stairs. A small, dim room with a narrow bed and a trunk of neatly folded towels. Phillips stood trembling by the door, his wide eyes red-rimmed. Poirot addressed him gently. "Phillips, last night you entered the garden and carried a tray into the conservatory. Tell us, what were you seeking, and why did you return the tray afterward?" The boy's lip quivered. I thought I saw Mistress Chalmers speaking with a gentleman in the rose garden." He handed her a small sealed envelope. "I saw it glint in the moonlight." He left, forcing the latch behind him. Then she opened the envelope, looked at it, and dropped it in the tray by accident. I fetched it, then hid it among the orchids so no one would find it and cause trouble." Lady Chalmers stepped forward in alarm. "An envelope? What did it contain, Phillips?" He shook his head. "I didn't see. It was sealed, and I was frightened. I thought it might be a love letter, or something scandalous, so I hid it. Then I tried to put the soil in the cabinet to cover my tracks." Poirot offered the tray to Hastings. "Let us return to the conservatory and retrieve that envelope. It may hold the key to Lady Chalmers's mystery, and to the silent offender who compelled it." He turned to Phillips. "Thank you for your honesty. You shall not be punished, but you must promise to tell the truth henceforth." Phillips nodded eagerly, relief flooding his face. Poirot patted the boy on the shoulder and guided him back to the conservatory. The group followed, hearts pounding with anticipation. Outside, the rain had ceased, leaving the garden glistening in the mid-morning sun. Inside, the stage was set for the discovery of the envelope, and with it, the next piece of the puzzle that would reveal both motive and culprit. Chapter 4. The Hidden Envelope. The conservatory's glass roof, arched high overhead, shimmered with damp sunlight as Hercule Poirot, Captain Hastings, Lady Winifred Chalmers, and a silent constable filed. Inside, rows of orchids and ferns stood sentinel in their pots, yet the usual harmony of flora felt unsettled now, their leaves heavy with water and suspense. The twisted tray young Phillips had delivered rested upon a marble-topped table beside the orchid cabinet, and Poirot's eyes shone with anticipation. "Mon ami," Poirot murmured to Hastings as they approached, "we venture now to recover the object that set this disturbance in motion. Observe the subtle details, the tray's lining, the cabinet's shadowed corners, the soil beneath the pot rims. The letter lies hidden somewhere among these green leaves." Hastings inhaled a breath and knelt before the cabinet, gently moving, the ferns aside. Lady Chalmers hovered, her expression taut with hope. The constable, gloved and cautious, stood at the ready. Poirot, leaning on his cane, smiled his steeple moustache smile. "Let us begin here," Poirot said, motioning to the tray. With a deft movement, he lifted it and turned it over on the table. Hidden beneath the tray's woven wicker lay a small cream-coloured envelope, its edges slightly curled from moisture. Poison-inked in feminine script was Lady Chalmers's name, and below it the word "Forgive." A hush fell. Lady Chalmers stepped forward, gloved fingers trembling as she reached for the envelope. Poirot gestured for caution. "Madam, allow me," he said, easing the envelope into his gloved hand. He studied its seal, a delicate embossed crest showing a rose entwined with a falcon's talon. A personal crest, no doubt, belonging to someone close. He turned the envelope so all might see. "Shall we open it together?" Lady Chalmers exhaled and nodded. Poirot used a slender letter opener, sliding it carefully beneath the flap. He unfolded the single sheet of heavy cream-coloured stationery, reading aloud in his quiet, precise voice. "My dearest Winifred, I pray you will forgive the subterfuge. I had no choice but to ensure your safety without alarming the household. The garden, your sanctuary, harboured a threat I could not reveal. Meet me at midnight in the Rose Pavilion, and I will explain all. Yours, in eternal devotion, a friend." Captain Hastings exchanged a wary glance with the constable. A clandestine meeting at midnight in the Rose Pavilion. Could this be the very appointment Mrs. Phillips witnessed? Lady Chalmers's gaze darted to the envelope crest. She pressed a fingertip to the papyrus. "I recognize this crest. It is Lady Margaret's. My cousin Margaret, who lives in Brighton." Her voice caught. "But why would she send this? Margaret is kind, but she has no reason to deceive me." Poirot folded the letter and replaced it in the envelope with delicate care. Madame, whatever motives urged your cousin to intervene, she marked herself as your friend, one who feared for your safety more than for propriety. We must follow the instructions within. Meet at midnight in the pavilion. There we may uncover the threat that prompted this secret missive. Hastings rose and patted his coat. Tonight, then, on the stroke of 12, we repair to the Rose Pavilion. Lady Chalmers drew in a steadying breath. Yes, but first I must compose a response, lest Margaret think me ungrateful. I will write, if only to assure her of my trust. Poirot inclined his head. A prudent gesture. And now, mon ami Hastings, let us inspect the pavilion and plan our approach. Discretion once more, for the very silence of that moonlit hour is the key to our success. That evening, the house fell into a hushed lull as servants extinguished lamps and retired. The moon, nearly full, cast silver beams across the gardens beyond. Poirot and Hastings waited with Lady Chalmers behind a yew hedge near the Rose Pavilion, a delicate wrought-iron structure draped in climbing roses that gleamed pale in the cool light. Lady Chalmers held a small lantern, its flicker illuminating her anxious features. Hastings carried a second lantern, while Poirot stood unencumbered, his cane tapping softly on the gravel path. "Remember," Poirot whispered, "the pavilion is enclosed by lattice work. Our visitor will step from within the roses. Our adversary may lurk in shadow. We must be prepared to question gently but firmly." Lady Chalmers nodded, smoothing her gloved hand over the lantern. Together they advanced along the gravel, the sound crunching softly beneath their feet. The fragrance of roses mingled with the night air, heavy and intoxicating. At the pavilion entrance, Hastings paused to examine the latch. A slender brass lever still undisturbed since its last opening. Poirot sniffed at the air. "Note," he whispered, "the scent of lavender oil. Someone placed fresh sprigs in the pavilion to mask another odour, perhaps." He lifted a gloved hand to a rose petal embedded in the lattice. "And this, resin from burning pine, an attempt to disguise footprints or to deter eavesdroppers." Lady Chalmers swallowed. Who would go to such lengths? Before Hastings could reply, a soft sound emerged from within the pavilion. A footstep upon flagstone, almost drowned by the night breeze. Poirot lifted his finger to his lips, and the three held their breath. From the shadows of the pavilion's recesses emerged a figure draped in a dark cloak, hood drawn low. Margaret stepped forward, her fair face pale in the lantern light. "Dearest Winifred," she breathed, her voice urgent. "I see you came." Lady Chalmers hurried forward. "Margaret, my cousin, why this secrecy? Why not come openly?" Margaret lowered her hood, revealing eyes bright with worry. "Forgive me, Winifred, but I could not risk prying ears in your home. I discovered yesterday that someone among your staff has been bribed, paid to deliver you a poisoned tonic in your morning tea. I found the proof in Mrs. Bryant's orders for medicinal herbs, and I feared for your safety." Hastings and Poirot exchanged astonished glances. Lady Chalmers's hand flew to her throat. "Poison tonic? My maid mixes my tea herself every morning." Margaret pressed a trembling hand to her chest. "Yes, but the supply of chamomile tea was tainted with foxglove leaves, enough to kill if administered daily. I intercepted the delivery, replaced the herbs, and sent you the letter, fearing immediate danger." Poirot stepped forward, voice calm. "Madame, your cousin has acted in the utmost devotion. We must now uncover which member of your household betrayed you, the one who ordered that tonique mortelle." Hastings drew his sword cane. "Then we search the conservatory, the kitchen, and Mrs. Bryant's quarters at once. No stone or petal must remain unturned." Margaret's eyes filled with tears. "Take me with you. I shall not rest until the villain is unmasked." Lady Chalmers laid a gentle hand on her cousin's arm. "You have already saved me, Margaret. Pray remain here until we return with the culprit in custody." Poirot nodded. "Indeed. Hastings, lead us back across the rose-bed. Silence once more, but swift action." As they retraced their steps, the lanterns cast long, flickering shadows upon the gravel. The roses closed their petals against the night's chill, unaware that within their midst a darker scheme had been thwarted. Yet the broken latch, the shaken conservatory, and now the threat of poison would soon yield their secrets to Poirot's methodical scrutiny, and to the quiet courage of those who dared to act in silence. Chapter 5. The Cup of Treachery. Rain slicked. Cobbles gleamed under the glare of lanterns as Hercule Poirot, Captain Hastings, and Chief Constable Granville hurried across the courtyard toward the servants' quarters. Lady Winifred Chalmers and Margaret followed behind in quiet conversation, shock and resolve mingling on their faces. The night air was thick with the scent of damp earth, and roses crushed beneath eager feet. Each knew that within these walls lay the answer to the poison plot, and that the next half-hour might decide Lady Chalmers's fate. Poirot paused beneath a low window, gloved hand raised to pause his companions. "Notice," he whispered, "the light in Mrs. Bryant's quarters remains burning, though all other lamps are extinguished. She did not retire as instructed." He advanced to the door, tapping twice with his cane. The constable followed and produced his master key. Together they entered the narrow passage, leaving Lady Chalmers and Margaret huddled behind. Mrs. Bryant's room was modest but immaculate. A seamstress's cot, a small wash-basin, and a plain wooden chair. Yet against one wall stood a narrow dresser of polished mahogany, its drawer slightly ajar. A faint coppery odour, unmistakably metallic, drifted from within. Poirot approached and drew the drawer fully open. Inside lay a small cobalt vial, stamped with no maker's mark. The stopper was missing, and a faint stain seamed the wood. Beside it, a scrap of torn paper bore a few scrawled words. "For her own good." Hastings bent low. "That unmistakable scent, digitalis. Yes, I can smell it." He glanced up. She intended to lace Lady Chalmers's tonic with it. Poirot nodded gravely. "Madame Bryant is our culprit or a pawn. We must question her immediately." He turned to the constable. "I trust you will secure this vial as evidence and refrain from touching it further." The constable slipped on white gloves, reverently retrieving the vial and sealing it in a glassine envelope. Poirot then led the way out to the corridor, where they found Mrs. Bryant herself, waiting with a strained composure. She wore her widow's black quietly, her hands folded at her waist. Her eyes, red-rimmed, closed when she saw Lady Chalmers enter with Margaret and Hastings. "Madam," Lady Chalmers said, voice steady though hurting, We have discovered your vial. Will you explain its purpose?" Mrs. Bryant's lips parted as if to speak, then closed. The traffic of emotion, fear, defiance, something unspoken, passed across her face. Poirot stepped forward, arms loose at his sides. "Madame Bryant, you were the only person with both access to my lady's tonic and the capacity to conceal poison. Why would you do this?" She swallowed, voice quavering. "I did it to help her, monsieur. To help Lady Chalmers." A murmur rippled through the small assembly. Hastings's brow furrowed in perplexity. Help her? With poison? Margaret's eyes flashed. "What are you saying, Mrs. Bryant?" The seamstress drew in a shuddering breath. "There are forces at work you do not understand. My lady, your dear cousin, has been weakened by stress and sleepless nights. I was asked to administer a strengthening draught, but when I saw it was merely a dangerous tonic, I sought to warn her by intercepting the first dose, and I took care to replace it with something harmless until I could confront the one who sent it." Lady Chalmers pressed her hand to her throat. "You intercepted it? But you then kept a vial of poison in your room. Who gave it to you?" Mrs. Bryant's gaze swept the group, seeking sympathy. "Not I. She did. Mrs. Smythe, my superior, handed me the vial yesterday afternoon. She said it contained a tonic to restore Lady Chalmers's strength. But when I looked at the label, no maker's mark, no instructions, I knew it was not right. I brought it here to keep it from being used, but I dared not throw it away until I spoke with someone I trusted." Poirot inclined his head thoughtfully. "So Mrs. Smythe delivered the poison, and instructed you to give it, but you hid it instead. Yet it remained in your possession, and the opportunity to swap vials with the real tonic was limited. You risked suspicion by carrying it here." Mrs. Bryant nodded, tears shining on her cheeks. I could not bear the thought of her drinking it. Lady Chalmers regarded the woman for a long moment, then spoke with soft authority. "You acted out of loyalty, but your fear drove you into further secrecy. We must now discover who commanded this betrayal at its source. Mrs. Smythe, you will answer for your actions." The housemaid, standing near the door, paled. Hastings laid a steadying hand on her arm. "Mrs. Smythe, you claim to have ordered this poison. Why?" Mrs. Smythe's mouth trembled as she crossed to the dresser, fingers brushing its surface. I was desperate. For weeks I watched my lady's health decline. Her nerves, her sleep, the worry etched on her face. I feared she would be ruined by anxiety over this garden affair. Someone in her own family, someone she trusts, wishes to harm her business, interests to pressure her into selling the estate. I overheard a whispered conversation in the dining room, implicating her cousin Sir Reginald Marley, who stands to gain from her distress. He sent Smythe to administer poison so that Lady Chalmers might appear unfit to manage her affairs and sign away her holdings. A shocked gasp rose from Margaret. "Reginald! But he is a gentleman. How could he betray his own kin?" Mrs. Smythe's voice was low and urgent. "He came to the house 3 nights ago under the pretext of a social call. He slipped into the kitchen while I fetched linens and told me of his plan. He promised me £50 if I carried it out, but I could not. So he gave the vial to Mrs. Bryant, saying she was more discreet." At this revelation, Lady Chalmers drew herself up with regal dignity. "Sir Reginald Marley will face the consequences of his treachery. You, Mrs. Smythe, and Mrs. Bryant will be treated for your roles, but I recognize your fear and your loyalty in seeking to protect me." Poirot turned to the constable. "Bring Sir Reginald Marley at once. Inform him that he is under arrest for conspiracy to murder and attempted poisoning." The constable bowed and hurried away. Hastings exhaled in relief. A dramatic turn, but one I did not foresee. Sir Reginald's motives were financial, you say? Smythe nodded. He has gambled recklessly and needs money. He believed Lady Chalmers's sale of the estate would solve his debts. Lady Chalmers's eyes glistened with righteous anger. He will sign nothing now but a confession, and I will exact justice for this betrayal. Poirot inclined his head. "Madame, the little latch that broke in silence led us through corridors of deceit to a far darker crime. Yet through loyalty and truth we have preserved your life and thwarted his ambition." As the group left the servants' wing, Lady Chalmers flanked by Hastings and Poirot, Margaret by her side, the sky above the great manor cleared, revealing a patch of stars. Within those walls, confirmation of betrayal had been extracted, forgiveness extended, and the estate's future safeguarded. And as dawn approached, Mortimer Manor, or rather Chalmers House, would stand stronger, its mistress wiser for the silent perils that had been overcome. Chapter 6. The Unravelling of. Alliance's dawn had barely touched the sky when Captain Hastings rapped gently upon the door of Lady Chalmers's morning sitting-room. Through the frosted glass, he could make out her silhouette, seated at her polished rosewood desk, writing by candlelight. Moments later, the door opened to admit Hastings, Hercule Poirot, and the chief constable, all bearing serious expressions. "Madame," Hastings said quietly, bowing, "Sir Reginald Marley awaits your presence in the library." Lady Chalmers set aside her pen and met their gazes with a calm resolve. "Very well. I shall join you there." She rose, smoothing her dark morning gown, and the small party passed through the oak-panelled corridor into the library, where the echo of soft footsteps seemed unusually loud. Reginald Marley sat in Poirot's favourite armchair, borrowed for the interrogation, with his wrists bound by a gentle cord to the chair's arms. His face, once open and assured, was now pale and drawn. Dark circles framed his uncertain eyes. At a small card table before him stood the cobalt vial, now safely contained under glass, and the embroidered reticule that had held the envelope, inscribed "Forgive." Lady Chalmers's voice, though steady, carried the weight of betrayal. "Reginald, you stand accused of commissioning a poison intended to weaken me so that I might relinquish my estate. You gave Mrs. Smythe the vial and £50 to ensure the plan's success. What have you to say in your defence?" Sir Reginald swallowed, his Adam's apple bobbing visibly. "Winifred, I admit my guilt, but I beg your mercy. My debts were overwhelming, lost beyond hope at the racing tracks and in foolish speculation. I thought that your selling the property would solve everything. I never intended you any lasting harm." Hastings leaned forward. "You expected the tonic to merely induce illness, enough to be blamed on nerves or fatigue, but not to kill, is that correct?" Marley nodded miserably. "Yes, I did not foresee Mrs. Bryant's intervention. I believed it would pass as a natural ailment." Poirot rose, folding his arms. His eyes, though gentle, were inexorable. Monsieur Marley, you overlooked one crucial fact. A garden gate's broken latch demands a forceful exit. You staged that scene to appear as if someone clandestine had entered, who might also have poisoned your cousin. Yet you misjudged the loyalty of the household staff, and the true motive behind the envelope was to summon aid, not scandal. He paused, turning to Lady Chalmers. Madame, the letter's crest belonged to Cousin Margaret, who sought to protect you. The design could not have been forged. Lady Chalmers nodded, and the soil from the rose garden, the scratched key, every piece led us to the servants' wing, not to any stranger. Reginald, you misdirected us, yet the only outsider was your own ambition. Reginald bowed his head. I accept whatever fate you impose. Lady Chalmers's expression softened with pity. You will face the magistrate for conspiracy to administer poison, but I shall petition for leniency on account of your confession and my esteem for family ties. She turned to Poirot. Mr. Poirot, what remains to complete this investigation? Marot smiled faintly. We must confirm that no other accomplice orchestrated the plan. Once the key evidence, the vial, the money, the envelope has been recorded, I propose we question each household member once more, ensuring no one else harboured knowledge. The chief constable spoke up. I shall interview Mrs. Smythe and Mrs. Bryant formally to record their statements under oath. As the constable departed with Marley in tow, Lady Chalmers led Poirot and Hastings to the hallway outside the servants' wing. I owe you both my deepest gratitude, she said, quietly. Without your guidance, I might never have uncovered this plot. Hastings tipped his hat. All in a day's work, madame. Poirot inclined his head. Madame, you have turned the wheel of fortune in your favour by showing mercy where justice demanded severity. Your cousin's letter spoke of devotion, and now your own kindness reinforces the bonds of family. Lady Chalmers offered a small, grateful smile. And now to restore order to Chalmers House. That afternoon, Lady Chalmers summoned her key servants to the great drawing-room. Mrs. Smythe, the head housemaid, Mrs. Bryant, the seamstress, and Mr. Thompson, the butler. Each stood before her in respectful array. Hastings and Poirot observed, from the side. I thank you all for your honesty in coming forward last night, Lady Chalmers began, voice firm yet kind. Mrs. Bryant and Mrs. Smythe, you acted under the direction of Sir Reginald Marley. He offered money and promises, yet you chose to protect me, though you risked your positions. She turned to Mrs. Bryant first. Elizabeth for hiding the vial and preventing its administration. I shall speak to the magistrate on your behalf. You shall face no charges. Tears welled in Mrs. Bryant's eyes. Madam, you are too generous. I feared only for you. Lady Chalmers's gaze softened. Your loyalty is your reward. And you, Margaret? Pardon, Mrs. Smythe? Mrs. Smythe curtsied. Madam. You refused to carry out the plan, then confessed your part. For your honesty, you shall retain your post, but I trust there will be no further secrets. Mrs. Smythe bowed deeply. Thank you, madame. I vow never to falter again. Poirot stepped forward. And you, Mr. Thompson, with access to all keys and knowledge of household rhythms, you aided in preserving Lady Chalmers's life by bringing us promptly to this scene. Your conduct exemplifies true service." The butler inclined his head, humbly. "I am honoured, monsieur." Lady Chalmers drew in a steady breath. "Chalmers House may now breathe freely. But one more act remains." She moved to a small ebony pedestal on which the twisted gate latch lay displayed. She lifted it gently. "This door shall be repaired, not merely replaced, to remind us that strength lies not in concealment, but in the willingness to open one's house and one's heart to truth." She carried the latch to the grand front doors, where the coachman and gardeners stood ready. With Hastings's assistance, she handed the latch to the gardener, instructing him to weld it anew and repaint the gate to its former lustre. The gate itself stood open, an invitation to honesty rather than secrecy. That evening, as candlelight danced upon the walls of the great dining hall, Lady Chalmers hosted a small dinner for her faithful staff and her beloved cousin Margaret. Poirot and Hastings were her honoured guests at the head of the table, their chairs slightly elevated to signify their role in restoring Chalmers House's harmony. Over roast pheasant and Christmas pudding, Lady Chalmers raised her glass in a toast to loyalty, to family, and to the unwavering pursuit of truth. Glasses chimed, joined in warm chorus by every voice. Poirot, ever dignified, sipped his claret and met Hastings's gaze with a twinkling smile. Hastings returned the gesture, raising an eyebrow as if to say, "Another mystery solved, another household saved." Outside the wind rustled through the rose garden, but inside laughter and gentle conversation prevailed. The broken latch, once a symbol of betrayal and danger, had become a token of renewal, a reminder that even when silence threatens to conceal, the truth will always ring clear under the watchful eyes of those who seek it. Chapter 7. The Secret. Codicil. The morning after Sir Reginald Marley's arrest dawned with pale sunshine filtering through gauzy curtains, gilding the oak panels of Lady Chalmers's private study. The heavy pressure of last night's revelation still weighed in the air, yet today promised a measure of calm, if only for a few hours. Lady Winifred Chalmers sat behind her writing desk, pen poised over fresh stationery. Across from her, Captain Hastings and Hercule Poirot lingered, each preparing for the next step in their investigation, uncovering the motive that had spurred Reginald's treachery, beyond mere debt and desperation. Lady Chalmers broke the silence. "I must draft letters to the magistrate and my solicitor to ensure Reginald's petition for leniency is supported. But somehow I feel that his actions sprang from a deeper grievance, something more than financial ruin." Poirot smiled gently. "Madame, you are correct to sense that human motives are seldom singular. May I suggest we examine your late father's will and any codicils he may have added? A slight alteration, unknown even to you, could have tipped Reginald toward ruin." Hastings nodded. "Yes. If Marley believed he stood to inherit only under certain conditions and discovered a change that disinherited him, he might have turned to poison in a rage." Lady Chalmers rose and crossed to a tall bookcase. "My solicitor lodged the original will in my father's study many years ago. I believe a copy remains here." She pressed a loose panel in the bookcase, and a narrow recess slid open to reveal a leather-bound folder. Inside lay the will, dated 1900, and beneath it a smaller parchment, a codicil signed by her father less than a year before his death. Poirot retrieved both documents with delicate care. He ran his fingertips over the crisp parchment, noting an additional clause. It is my wish that, should my daughter Winifred choose to remain at Chalmers House, then my nephew Reginald Marley shall receive only a token legacy of 1 shilling, on the condition that he maintain the garden in honour of our family name. Should she relinquish her residence or sell the property, his inheritance shall revert to me in full. Lady Chalmers's eyes widened as she read the clause aloud. I never knew of this. My father did not discuss it with me. Hastings frowned. So if Reginald believed the estate would pass to him only if you sold it, and then discovered this codicil, he would stand to lose everything unless you complied. Poirot's gaze was steady. Madame's understanding of her father's wishes, perhaps sympathetic, clashed with Reginald's expectations. His sense of entitlement, combined with financial desperation, drove him to desperate measures. But now that we know the codicil existed, you may wish to reveal it to the magistrate. Lady Chalmers replaced the papers in the folder. Yes, my father's intentions were clear. The preservation of Chalmers House under my stewardship, with Reginald's legacy curtailed if I remained here. I can see now why he believed poison the only recourse. Poirot nodded, and yet, in seeking to remove you, he risked scandal that would destroy your family's name, hardly the action of a grateful heir. Hastings tapped the desk. Even so, the codicil explains his motive. Now shall we confirm there are no further amendments or secret documents? A man willing to poison his cousin might have sought other means to manipulate the will. Lady Chalmers rose again, flanked by her 2 advisers. Then let us search the entire study. Desk drawers, locked cabinets, anywhere my father could hide another testament. They began methodically. The roll-top desk's hidden compartments, the mahogany bureau with its secret lock mechanism, the carved walnut cabinet containing her father's desk set. In each, they found only letters and commonplace documents, no additional codicils. At last, Poirot paused before a small inkwell set upon a narrow writing stand. He tapped the stand. A hidden catch released, and the stand swung upward to reveal a slender drawer. Inside lay a memorandum in her father's handwriting, a personal note addressed to Lady Chalmers. Winifred, it began, I entrust you with our family's legacy. Know that I have never doubted your strength. Should you face discord, remember that our name endures through honour, not through acres or wealth alone. Use this knowledge wisely. Lady Chalmers swallowed, reading the note's final lines. He affirmed his faith in me, rather than in legal technicalities. Perhaps he sensed discord in his nephew's heart, and sought to bolster my resolve. Poirot folded the paper. Your father's wisdom surpasses any codicil. He understood that loyalty and honour are more binding than any legal clause. Hastings glanced at his watch. We should present both documents to the magistrate. He turned to Lady Chalmers. Madame, may I deliver them on your behalf? I'll ride to the barracks at once. She inclined her head. Yes, Arthur, and Poirot. I am grateful for your insight. Poirot bowed. Madam, justice and mercy walk hand in hand here. Let us see Reginald face the truth, tempered by your compassion. That afternoon, the magistrate's chamber was hushed and austere. Lady Chalmers sat beside her solicitor, while Hastings presented the will and codicil. The magistrate, a stern-faced man in robes, studied the documents carefully. Poirot observed from a discreet corner. "Lady Chalmers," the magistrate said, "this codicil significantly alters the distribution of the estate. Your father's intent is clear. I will note the circumstances in the official record and consider Reginald's confession and your petition for leniency." He looked to Reginald, who stood before the bench, eyes downcast. "Mr. Marley, do you acknowledge this codicil and accept its terms?" Reginald bowed his head. "I do, your worship. I understand now why my actions were misguided, and I accept whatever penalties you deem just." The magistrate tapped his gavel lightly. "Then I shall remit the maximum penalty in light of your confession and Lady Chalmers's goodwill. You will pay a fine equivalent to your household staff's annual wages and perform 1 year of community service. You will also forfeit your shilling legacy. Let this be an end to the matter." Reginald exhaled heavily, relief mingled with shame on his face. Lady Chalmers rose quietly and extended her hand. "Reginald, may you find renewal through service and learn the honour my father prized." He grasped her hand. "Thank you, Winifred. I shall not betray your trust again." Back at Chalmers' house, the household staff gathered in the oak-panelled hall to hear the news. Mrs. Bryant and Mrs. Smythe stood beside Mr. Thompson, their gratitude evident as Lady Chalmers recounted the magistrate's judgment. Poirot and Hastings watched from the doorway, pleased to see the servant spirits buoyed by justice tempered with mercy. As the afternoon sun slanted through the tall windows and caught the motes of dust dancing in the air, Lady Chalmers paused. "Today we have seen the power of truth and honour. Let this house stand as testament to my father's words. Our name endures through loyalty and integrity." Hastings and Poirot exchanged satisfied glances. Then, as laughter and conversation resumed among the staff, the two friends slipped away toward the rose garden, its gate newly mended, its latch shining in the light. There, among the blossoms, they paused. Another case brought to its fitting conclusion, Hastings said softly. Poirot tapped his cane. "Yes, Hastings. Once more, the heart reveals what the latch concealed, and justice blooms through compassion." They walked on, their silhouettes trailing down the garden path as the roses swayed in the gentle breeze, whispering of secrets kept and truths revealed. Chapter 8. Echoes in the Rose Garden. The late summer sun slanted low over the rose garden, gilding each petal with a warm honeyed glow. Lady Winifred Chalmers stood on the marble terrace, her slender fingers resting gently on the balustrade, as she surveyed rows of healthy blooms, glowing pink, white, and deep crimson. The long unfolding days of mystery and betrayal felt distant, now tempered by the peace that had settled over Chalmers' house like a soft veil. Yet every so often her breath caught, and she recalled how nearly that peace had been shattered. Hercule Poirot and Captain Hastings joined her silently. Their steps muffled on the terrace stones. Hastings carried a silver tray with a porcelain teapot and matching cups, while Poirot kept his gaze fastened on the roses, his little grey cells still turning. "My lady," Hastings murmured, pouring tea, "it is good to stand here again in the quiet, without the weight of poison or broken latches." She smiled, accepting a cup. "Yes, Captain, I am grateful beyond words. And to think the very heart of my home, the garden gate, was once a harbinger of peril. Poirot raised his cup and sipped, his eyes never leaving the rows of flowers. The garden speaks now only of hope, madame. Each rose is a testament to your courage and your father's wisdom. But if I may, I wish to return one final time to the scene of the broken latch. Lady Chalmers inclined her head. Of course, Monsieur Poirot, lead the way. They descended the terrace steps and followed the gravel path to the iron gate at the far end. The latch, newly welded and repainted a glossy black, bore no sign of its earlier damage. The hinges moved with a soft click, and as Lady Chalmers opened it, a gentle breeze stirred the rose arches overhead. Poirot knelt beside the gate, running a gloved finger along its smooth curve. Observe, Hastings, no traces of the old scar remain. Yet take heart in what it taught us, that even the smallest weakness can expose the greatest dangers. He rose and faced Lady Chalmers. Are you satisfied, madame, that no further threat lingers? She stepped through the gate and looked back. Completely. I shall no longer fear what lies beyond these walls. She turned to Hastings. Would you escort me to the pavilion? I wish to gather fresh blooms for the drawing-room. As they walked away, Hastings offered his arm to Winifred, who accepted with a soft laugh of gratitude. Poirot watched them go, his expression thoughtful. Then he lingered in the silence, absorbing the gentle rustle of leaves and the distant song of a nightingale. Later that afternoon, Lady Chalmers convened her most trusted staff in the drawing-room. Mr. Thompson the butler, Mrs. Smythe the housemaid, and Mrs. Bryant the seamstress. The air was warm, scented faintly of roses and lemon, and the afternoon light gilded the polished mahogany furniture. My friends, Lady Chalmers began, I wish to thank you again for your loyalty and your courage. Because of you, Chalmers, house stands unbowed. She paused, smiling at each face. As a token of my gratitude, I have arranged for a small fete tomorrow afternoon. We shall celebrate the season's harvest and the health of this home. The staff exchanged glances of delight. Mrs. Smythe curtsied deeply. Madam, your kindness humbles us all. Mr. Thompson inclined his head. It will be our honour to serve. Poirot, seated in an armchair by the hearth, nodded approvingly. Hastings sat beside him with a contented smile. A well-deserved celebration, Hastings whispered. Poirot closed his eyes briefly. Indeed, Hastings, and in such moments of joy, one realizes that the truest victory is peace restored. The following day, Chalmers House hummed with activity. White canvas canopies shaded long tables laden with local cheeses, fresh fruits, and chilled lemonade. Children from the nearby village, invited by Lady Chalmers, chased each other across the lawn, their laughter mingling with the hum of bees. In one corner, musicians readied fiddles and flutes. Lady Chalmers, wearing a dress of pale rose trimmed with lace, moved among her guests offering smiles and gentle words. Hastings escorted her whenever she paused, and Poirot drifted gracefully. Among the tables, conversing in soft tones with Mr. Green, the local schoolmaster, and Reverend Clara Vaughan. Even Mrs. Phillips, the gardener's boy, was present, now restored to service, and he beamed each time a visitor complimented the blossoms. As Meredith Phillips knelt to untangle a knotted ribbon on a young girl's basket of petals, Poirot joined him. "My boy," he said quietly, "your courage in telling the truth saved your mistress's life. Never forget the strength that lies in honesty." Philip straightened with pride. "Thank you, Monsieur Poirot." Poirot patted his shoulder. "Now go and enjoy the fete." As sun dipped toward the horizon, Lady Chalmers stepped to the centre of the lawn to address her guests. She raised a crystal goblet of sparkling elderflower wine and cleared her throat. "My friends," she began, voice rich with emotion, "today we celebrate more than the bounty of the season. We honour the resilience of this home and the bonds that unite us. Let us raise our glasses to loyalty, to truth, and to the promise of tomorrow." Glasses rose in unison, the soft clink echoing across the garden. Hastings and Poirot joined in the toast, their hearts light with satisfaction. After the cheer, Lady Chalmers beckoned Hastings to her side. Together they watched the sun sink behind the yew trees, painting the sky in shades of rose and gold. Hastings offered his arm, and she rested her hand there, gazing out with a serene smile. Poirot, observing them from a discreet distance, allowed himself a rare, gentle grin. He tapped his cane on the gravel. "Mon ami," he said softly, "a case that began with a broken latch ends with the restoration of trust, and in that we see the fullest justice." Hastings nodded, his gaze on Lady Chalmers. "Yes, Poirot, and now, if I may say so, it is time for all of us to step beyond the shadows and live in the light." As the final hues of sunset gave way to twilight, the guests sang and danced, the roses glowing in the lantern light. Chalmers' house, once beset by silence and deceit, now rang with laughter and music, and beneath the new latch, sealed strong and unbroken, the promise of peace endured. Chapter 9. A Whisper from the Past. The morning air at Chalmers' house carried a crisp promise of autumn, faint smoke curling from distant chimneys, and the gardens, roses now tinged with the softest gold of first frost. Lady Winifred Chalmers sat at her writing desk in the East Wing study, pen poised above a fresh sheet of parchment, commemorating the fate's success for the household ledger. Outside, Captain Hastings paced the terrace, his cane tapping in a measured rhythm against the flagstones, while Hercule Poirot lingered beside the tall sash window, surveying the garden with thoughtful intensity. "Madam," Hastings called, through the open window, voice buoyant with the previous day's triumph. "The garden paths are clear. The children's drawings may be sent to the village school this afternoon." Winifred smiled and dipped her pen. "Capital, Captain. I shall draft the letter presently. Monsieur Poirot, do you find inspiration in the view?" Poirot turned, smooth-haired and serene. He placed a fingertip against the glass. "My lady, nature often conceals its subtler messages in patterns we overlook. But today I sense a disturbance, an echo of uncertainty beneath the calm." Before she could reply, Mrs. Smythe entered with a letter bearing no crest, only Lady Chalmers's name inscribed in a delicate, unfamiliar hand. The envelope's seal, a small flourish of vine, was intact, yet its arrival by the morning post felt incongruous to the household's recent tranquillity. Winifred broke the seal and withdrew the single sheet. As her eyes read the opening line, her colour drained. "Your actions commend you, yet the past remains unavenged. Seek the silent chamber, and there you will uncover what was once lost." Hastings leaned forward. "Another secret chamber." Poirot's black eyes gleamed. "Indeed, Hastings, the reference to a silent chamber suggests a hidden room unknown even to those who call this place home. We must act swiftly before rumour disturbs the household." Lady Chalmers rose, slipping the letter into her desk. "But who or what could have sent this? The envelope bears no return address." Poirot extended his hand. "Let us examine this parchment for thread or watermark. Then we shall consult the manor's architectural plans and explore hidden recesses in the east wing." He tapped his cane. "Silence, once a cloak for crime, may again guide us to truth." By midday, the trio gathered in the drawing-room amid the hush of undisturbed furniture. Hastings unrolled the ancient blueprints of Chalmers' house upon a side table. The bold lines traced corridors, chambers, and service passages, but in one corner, near the original servant staircase, a blank rectangle caught Poirot's eye. "Observe, Hastings," Poirot said, pointing at the plain's unmarked space. "Between the linen closet and the corridor lies a void, no label, no door. A silent chamber indeed." Winifred leaned over, tracing the lines. "I never knew of this. Neither did my father's steward." She pressed her hand to her heart. "We must find this room at once." Poirot nodded with delicate gravity. "Let us proceed to the east wing corridor and inspect the hinges and panelling. Silence is our ally. Listen for a hollow note." He led the way toward the servants' staircase, footsteps muffled by the thick carpet. In the east wing, the corridor's oak panelling glowed amber in the afternoon light. Mrs. Smythe and Mrs. Bryant hovered discreetly behind, curiosity bright in their eyes. Poirot drew his cane's silver tip along the wood's grooves, tapping gently until a hollow resonance emerged. "Here," he murmured. "Listen, Hastings." The echo was faint but distinct against the solid wood of adjacent panels. Hastings pressed his palm to the surface, lips parted. Poirot found a lever concealed amid the vertical stiles. With a soft click, the panel swung inward, revealing a narrow, torch-lit stair descending into shadow. Mrs. Smythe gasped, hand over her heart, while Winifred caught her breath. "Madame," Poirot said, stepping back, "we have found the silent chamber's gateway. Would you care to lead, or shall I?" Despite the weight of expectation, Lady Chalmers met his gaze with calm determination. "I will," she said firmly. Taking a small lantern from Hastings, she let its glow guide her into the hidden passage. The stairway was steep and worn, lined with stones darkened by centuries of secrecy. At the bottom, they emerged into a small vaulted room, no larger than a modest study. The lantern's beam fell upon a carved stone alcove, in which lay a dust-laden wooden chest bound in iron. Its lock was rusted but intact. Poirot knelt and brushed away centuries of cobweb and dust, revealing a family crest engraved on the chest's lid, a falcon entwined with a rose. Winifred inhaled sharply. "Hercule, this belonged to my grandmother," she whispered. "She lived in seclusion here for a time before the main house was expanded." Poirot set the lantern on the floor. "Then, this chest may contain family secrets. Journals, letters, perhaps the original codicil we discovered in the will. But it is locked. Hastings, Do you have any tool to open it without damage?" Hastings produced a slender file from his pocket, a tool Poirot had once praised. With deft care, Hastings filed the lock's shackle until it yielded with a soft snap. As they lifted the lid, a faint sigh seemed to echo from the darkness, as if the chamber itself exhaled a long-held secret. Inside lay a stack of parchment bound with ribbon, atop a small velvet pouch. Lady Chalmers lifted the parchment and untied the ribbon, revealing her grandmother's spidery script, "To my dearest Winifred, or to she who bears my name. Within these pages lie truths of our lineage, sacrifices made in silence, and warnings that no rose is without its thorn. Read and remember." Beneath the letter, they found journals chronicling her grandmother's life, her struggle to protect the estate during times of war, her secret correspondences with allies she dared not name, and her fear of treachery from within the household. The final entry spoke of a bribe offered to her housekeeper to abduct her child, an ancestor of Lady Chalmers, for ransom. Winifred's hand trembled as she traced the words. She hid this here to safeguard her daughter, my mother, during the siege. She feared that enemies might exploit the estate's vulnerability. Poirot's gaze was solemn. "Madame, this secret chamber was your grandmother's refuge. She vowed silence to protect her bloodline. Yet now that truth emerges, you must decide how to honor her sacrifice, by letting these words rest in peace, or by sharing them to fortify your family's legacy." Hastings placed a comforting hand on Lady Chalmers's shoulder. "Your grandmother acted with love. You will know best how to give her memory its due." Lady Chalmers closed the journal gently. "I believe her story strengthens our resolve. Yet some secrets deserve only private remembrance. I shall preserve these journals here in this chamber for future generations to discover when the time is right." Poirot bowed his head. "A wise choice, madame. The silent chamber remains silent, but now its legacy speaks through you." They ascended the hidden stair and replaced the panel. The corridor sprang back into its seamless veneer, concealing the stair behind oak filigree once more. Mrs. Smythe closed the panel with reverence, and they returned to the study, the journals held in Lady Chalmers's arms. That evening, gathered once more in the drawing-room, Lady Chalmers poured a glass of claret for each of her companions. She raised hers in a quiet toast. "To secrets kept and secrets revealed," she said, voice strong, "and to the women of our house whose courage and silence shaped our future." Hastings and Poirot lifted their glasses in unison, while Mrs. Smythe and Mrs. Bryant watched with moist eyes, understanding at last the depth of devotion woven through their mistress's lineage. Outside, the first leaves of autumn drifted upon the garden paths, carrying with them the echoes of those who walked in silence. Within Chalmers' house, peace reigned, tempered by the knowledge that some truths, like the rose, blossom only when tended with care. Chapter 10. Bonds Renewed. The morning sun crested the horizon in a soft amber glow, illuminating Chalmers' house in a gentle warmth that seemed at odds with the chill in the air. Lady Winifred Chalmers descended the staircase in her father's study wing, her footsteps echoing against the ancient stone. In her arms she carried the leather-bound journals she had recovered from the secret chamber, their pages still faintly warmed by her grandmother's long-forgotten hand. Today she would decide what portions of that history belonged to private memory and what must guide the household's future. She found Captain Hastings in the great hall, studying a map of the estate's boundaries spread across a broad oak table. Maurice Tilney, the steward, hovered nearby, quill tucked behind his ear. "Good morning, madam," Hastings greeted with gentle formality, folding the map into neat quarters. "I trust your examination of the journals provided clarity?" Lady Chalmers set the volumes upon a smaller writing desk at the room's edge. "Indeed, Hastings, my grandmother's words confirm the sacrifices made to preserve the estate, and the risks she took in silence. Yet I feel that her tale, though moving, must remain our family's quiet strength, rather than a matter for the wider world." Hastings inclined his head in respect. "A wise course. And Maurice here," he gestured to the steward, "has prepared the necessary arrangements to catalogue and secure the chamber as a family archive." The steward bowed deferentially. "I shall see that a lock of your design is installed upon the hidden panel, madame, and that the journals are placed in sealed chests, each bearing a family crest." Winifred pressed her lips together thoughtfully. "Yes, let the chamber remain, sealed once more, pending a time when its lessons are needed again." She turned to Hastings. "And now for the estate's public affairs. The village square awaits our final approval of the plaque commemorating my grandmother's guardianship. Shall we proceed?" Hastings smiled. "With pleasure, madam." By mid-afternoon, a small crowd had assembled in the village square. Wreaths of wildflowers adorned the corners, and 2 flowering hawthorns framed the bronze plaque mounted upon a low stone plinth. The townspeople, clad in their Sunday best, murmured in anticipation. As Lady Chalmers, Captain Hastings at her side, stepped forward. Reverend Clara Vaughan, who had sheltered the orphaned children under Lady Chalmers's foundation, offered a prayer of dedication. Winifred then removed the crimson cloth that veiled the plaque, revealing an inscription gilded in leaf. "In memory of Margaret Chalmers, 1860-1920, guardian of our home and hearts, whose silent devotion secured our future." Round of heartfelt applause rose as villagers pressed forward to examine the plaque. Margaret Phillips, the gardener's apprentice, the boy now a young man, touched the inscription with reverent fingers. "Your grandmother saved our village during the floods," he said in a hushed tone. "Yet she asked that no medal be given. This morning she has it at last." He stepped back, a shy smile on his face. Lady Chalmers bowed her head. Her wishes were simple. That kindness be its own reward. Today I honour her memory so that her spirit endures among us. She offered water to a small child, then turned to Hastings. "Thank you for escorting me, Captain." He touched his cap. "It was my honour, madam." Poirot, standing near the edge of the gathering, tipped his head in polite acknowledgment. His little grey cells were satisfied. The past had been honoured, the present enriched, and the future secured. That evening, back at Chalmers House, the household staff assembled in the grand dining room for an intimate supper. The table was set with your grandmother's fine porcelain, and within each napkin lay a sprig of lavender, chosen for its soothing fragrance and its symbol of serenity. As Lady Chalmers entered, she met each servant's gaze with warmth. "Thank you all for your service, your courage, and your loyalty," she began, her soft voice carrying across the vaulted room. "Tonight we dine as one family, No secrets but for those we hold with pride. She lifted her glass in a silent toast, and every eye sparkled in response. Later, after the staff had retired, Lady Chalmers convened Captain Hastings and Hercule Poirot in the library. A single candle burned low upon the desk, and the hush weighed tenderly upon the shelves of leather-bound tomes. "Monsieur Poirot," Winifred said, "I cannot express my gratitude sufficiently. It was through your guidance that I found courage to face both the poison plot and the hidden codicil. I have petitioned the magistrate to treat my cousin Reginald with mercy, and I trust that my household now knows the value of honesty." Poirot's dark eyes twinkled in the candlelight. "Madame, you have shown that true strength lies in both justice and compassion. It was your father's legacy, your grandmother's sacrifice, and your own unwavering resolve that have guided us." He placed a slender hand upon his cane. "And now your family's future is safe." Hastings smiled broadly. "Indeed, madame, and I, for one, shall look back on this autumn with fondness rather than dread." Winifred closed her eyes, drawing a deep breath. "Then let us close this chapter together." She opened a small drawer and retrieved 3 copies of a single line penned on the moment's parchment. "Where silence once concealed peril, now blooms the promise of loyalty." She handed one to Hastings, one to Poirot, and kept the 3rd for herself. "May these words guide us whenever the shadows stir." In the days that followed, Chalmers House settled into a gentle rhythm. The hidden chamber remained untouched, but guarded. The rose garden, once a place of clandestine meetings, now rang with children's laughter. And Lady Chalmers, seated at her desk each morning, wrote letters of thanks, letters of kindness, and occasional notes of counsel to village families who sought her esteem. On the first day of autumn's end, Captain Hastings stood once more at the garden gate, polishing his boots. Poirot observed from the terrace contentment in every line of his posture. Lady Chalmers emerged in a coat of forest green, a small parcel in hand. "My friends," she called, "I have one final gift for you both." She opened the parcel to reveal an antique silver key engraved with her grandmother's crest. "It is the key to the silent chamber," she explained, holding it aloft. "I entrust it to you, for safekeeping, should the need ever arise again." Poirot accepted the key with respect, turning it between his gloved fingers as though measuring its weight. "Madame, this key symbolizes trust, an honour I shall guard always." Hastings took his copy of the parchment and tucked it into his coat. "I will carry this with me wherever I go." Lady Chalmers smiled, her eyes bright in the waning light. "Then our bonds are sealed. Let us walk through the garden and welcome the season unafraid, knowing that silence now serves only as a guardian of our most treasured secrets." And so they stepped forward beneath the rose arches, leaving behind the echoes of past dangers, and entering a future tempered by loyalty, guided by truth, and warmed by the gentle promise of autumn's final blaze. Chapter 11. Mercy in Winter's Light. A crisp frost glazed the rose garden beneath the pale December sun, each petal tipped with crystal diamonds that sparkled like scattered fairy dust. Snow lay in shallow drifts along the north wall, and the yew hedges stood trimmed as solemn sentinels against the grey sky. Lady Winifred Chalmers moved across the terrace in a woollen cloak of deep emerald, her breath rising in little clouds. In her hand she carried a sealed letter addressed in Reginald Marley's familiar hand, an address that made her heart tighten with conflicting hopes. Inside the warmth of the great hall, Captain Hastings and Hercule Poirot awaited her return. A fire crackled in the hearth, and the air smelled of burning pine from the Yule log. Hastings rose as she entered, offering her a chair by the fire. "Madam, you appear deep in thought," he said kindly. "Does the snow trouble you so early in the season?" Winifred broke the seal of her cousin's letter. Hastings and Poirot watched as she read. At last she looked up, eyes bright with unshed tears. "Reginald writes to request my forgiveness, and to ask humbly for a post here at Chalmers House, that he might atone by serving the estate he once betrayed." She folded the letter carefully. "He wishes to restore the old rose beds, those he nearly destroyed by his absence and carelessness, with his own hands." Poirot rose and offered his gloved hand. "Madam, such humility is rare. To accept his offer would continue the mercy you first showed him at the magistrate's bench. It may also heal the wound his treachery left upon the family." His voice was soft but firm, echoing the calm crackle of the fire. Hastings nodded. "Indeed, and think of the good work he might do, reviving the winter shrubs, reinforcing the greenhouse windows against frost. He could become the steward of the garden's renewal." Lady Chalmers stood and paced a few paces, the hem of her cloak whispering, "On the rugs." At last she turned, resolve shining in her gaze. "Very well. I shall write him word that he may return, under conditions of probation, to demonstrate his contrition. Let this estate be his place of penance and of redemption." She wrote rapidly at a small desk, the lamplight illuminating her steady script. Hastings fetched the messenger's cloak, and Poirot selected a silver sealing-wax luncheon knife from the sideboard. The letter was sealed with a simple impression of her signet ring, a rose and falcon entwined. "Send this at once to Reginald's lodgings," Lady Chalmers instructed, "and instruct him to report to the gardener's hut tomorrow at dawn." Before dawn the next day, Hastings and Lady Chalmers stood in the icy courtyard, the sky a pale wash of lavender. Men in lantern-lit cloaks bustled with trays of tools and bundles of saplings. Poirot arrived in his carriage coat, pipe in pocket, lantern in hand. From the servant staircase emerged Sir Reginald Marley, hair grizzled at the temples, shoulders stooped by remorse rather than age. He carried a sack of rose canes and a small trowel wrapped in oilskin. At the sight of Lady Chalmers, he halted with a sharp intake of breath. "Cousin," he said, voice thick, "thank you for this chance to make amends." She inclined her head. "Your work here will speak louder than words, Reginald." He knelt in the frost-hardened soil and began to dig with trembling determination. Hastings joined him, handing across winter-hardy rose canes whose bare roots glistened with moisture. Poirot, lantern set beside the east wall, observed in respectful silence as Marley planted each cane with painstaking care. For hours they worked side by side, Hastings clearing debris, Lady Chalmers supervising the layout, and Marley coaxing the roses into their new beds. The clink of spade on stone and the soft thud of trowel against earth drew clear notes in the cold air. At midday, the greenhouse stood ready to shelter young shoots. and a row of new cane roses rose like hopeful sentinels along the path. Poirot approached Marley, who brushed dirt from his hands. "Monsieur," Poirot began in his gentle accent, "you have restored what once lay neglected. In doing so, you restore your own honour as well." Marley's eyes glistened. "I only hope my labour can atone for my folly." Lady Chalmers placed a hand on her cousin's shoulder. "Your labour is the finest apology I could accept. Let us now return indoors, where a warm meal and hot tea await. You have earned your place among us once more." That evening, Chalmers House glowed with candlelight and pine boughs. In the dining room, the household staff, Mr. Thompson, Mrs. Smythe, Mrs. Bryant, and young Meredith Phillips, assembled with Hastings and Poirot. Lady Chalmers entered, flanked by her cousin, who looked both nervous and proud in a new gardener's smock. "Tonight," she announced, "we celebrate not only Yuletide, but renewal of gardens, of trust, and of family bonds." She raised a goblet of mulled wine fragrant with cinnamon and clove. "To Reginald Marley, who has planted roots of repentance so that roses may bloom again." Glasses chimed. Marley bowed to each staff member, who cheered in honest approval. The warmth of the fire, the scent of pine, and the gentle hum of gratitude mingled in the candle-lit room, banishing winter's chill in every heart. After supper, Poirot and Hastings lingered near the drawing-room's hearth with Lady Chalmers. The journals from the secret chamber lay upon the coffee table bound and sealed. In the corner, a small Christmas tree sparkled with hand-carved ornaments made by the village children under Reverend Vaughan's guidance. "Madam," Hastings said softly, "with the estate secured, the household at peace, and your cousin restored, what remains to complete this season's story?" She gazed around at the flickering lights and snowy window panes. "Only to share one final gift." She crossed to the journals. Unlocking the first chest with the silver key she had entrusted to Poirot. With a quiet nod, she handed him the key to keep until the next time the silent chamber's wisdom was needed. Poirot accepted it solemnly. "I shall guard it faithfully, madam." She then offered Hastings the parchment upon which her grandmother's closing words were inscribed. "Where silence once concealed peril, now blooms the promise of loyalty." Hastings pressed it to his heart. "I will carry these words with me always." Finally, Lady Chalmers turned to Hastings and Poirot, gratitude shining in her eyes. "Thank you both. Without you, Chalmers House might still be shadowed by fear. Now, under mercy's light, we move forward together." Hastings and Poirot exchanged a warm glance. Poirot tapped his cane once more, a signal of gentle resolution. "Winter deepens outside," he said. "Inside these walls, kindness and truth shall be our guiding stars." And so they sat together by the glowing hearth, sharing stories of the year's trials and triumphs, the snow falling softly beyond the window. In Chalmers House, winter's silence carried not dread, but the soft promise of spring, of roses yet to bloom, and of bonds renewed under winter's light. Chapter 12. The spoon in the snow lay deep and silent over Chalmers House, blanketing terraces, gardens, and outbuildings in a hushed white. Only the soft scrape of shovel on stone disturbed the morning calm, as Lady Winifred Chalmers and Captain Hastings made their way toward the greenhouse for first light inspection. Hastings paused beneath the frosted window, the glass etched with delicate patterns reminiscent of the rose's petals. "Madam," he said, gloved hand raised to rap gently, "it seems Mrs. Bryant's silver teaspoon is missing from last night's service. She discovered the tray incomplete at breakfast." Winifred frowned. "A single teaspoon. Yet it belonged to my grandmother's original tea service. Its absence troubles me more than its value." She turned to Hastings. "Would you fetch Monsieur Poirot? I believe one final small mystery remains to seal the year's labours." Moments later, Hercule Poirot arrived in his long wool coat, his waxed moustaches impeccable despite the cold. He listened as Hastings and Lady Chalmers described the missing spoon. A slender hallmarked piece with a rose and falcon motif matching her grandmother's coat of arms. Poirot's dark eyes sparkled. "Madame, a lone teaspoon vanished into the deep silence of snow. Surely a puzzle worthy of our little grey cells. Let us examine the scene of its disappearance." They proceeded to the conservatory, where the silver tea service still stood on its marble tray. One spoon lay among the cups. Its partner was gone. Hastings knelt to inspect the rim of the tray. No scratch or displacement marks here. The spoon was taken deliberately, not knocked off. Poirot pressed a fingertip to the marble. No residue of sugar or other clue. Let us consider where the thief might have carried it. He turned and swept his gaze across the terrace, where footsteps led to a side door. Outside, the snow showed a single set of prints heading toward the Rose Gate. "Madame, has any visitor passed this way since dawn?" Poirot inquired. Lady Chalmers shook her head. "Only the gardener's boy Meredith, who cleared the paths." Hastings pointed to the prints. "These are small boots, smaller than mine, certainly. Perhaps Meredith's indeed." Poirot followed the trail across the snow, Lady Chalmers and Hastings close behind. The footprints arced around the greenhouse, then halted abruptly at the locked rose gate, its latch gleaming black. At the base lay a glint of silver. Poirot bent and retrieved the spoon, its bowl still pristine. Here it is, with no tarnish, from snow or soil, undisturbed. The spoon was deposited purposefully. He examined the handle, and found no bend or scratch beyond the maker's hallmarks. "Madame, the spoon was taken and returned." "Why?" Hastings rubbed his chin. "A prank? A test of vigilance?" Lady Chalmers frowned, gloved thumb brushing the silver. "My grandmother's spoon is hardly a good joke. If someone sought to provoke me, they chose a cherished heirloom." Her voice trembled with unwanted emotion. Poirot stood straight, eyes bright. "Then this act was symbolic, designed to remind you of the past, or to signal an admirer of tradition." He tapped the spoon's handle. "We must question Meredith. He cleared the paths early and passed the greenhouse. Did he handle the tea tray?" They retraced the prints to the gardener's quarters beneath the east wing. Meredith Phillips emerged from his modest room, cheeks pink from exertion. "Meredith," Lady Chalmers said gently, "were you in the greenhouse this morning?" He bowed his head. "Yes, madame. The paths were heavy with snow, and I thought you might slip. I cleared the way and then fetched hot water for the conservatory's heaters." He glanced at the spoon in Poirot's hand. "Is that it, madame?" "Yes," Hastings said. "Did you touch it?" Meredith's lip quivered. "I did, madame, only to steady the tray as I carried the kettle. The spoon slipped from the tray when I set it down to stoke the heater fire." He reached into his pocket and withdrew another spoon, plain but sturdy. I replaced it with this, planning to return your grandmother's spoon after the thaw." Lady Chalmers's eyes filled. "You exchanged it out of loyalty, so that my service would not be disrupted." She offered a hand to the boy. "Thank you, Meredith. Your thoughtfulness outweighs any prank." Poirot patted Meredith's shoulder. "Bravissimo, mon garçon. You have shown that small acts of service can speak more loudly than grand gestures." Hastings smiled. "And thanks to you, the spoon's brief flight ends in kindness." In the conservatory, they placed the original teaspoon alongside its fellows. Lady Chalmers polished it gently, restoring its lustre. "My grandmother's tea service remains whole," she said softly, "and so does my faith in those who care for me." That evening, the household gathered for a final light supper by the hearth. The silver spoons gleamed at each place setting, a quiet testament to loyalty and attentiveness. Lady Chalmers rose to speak. "Friends," she began, voice warm and strong, "today we have recovered more than a lost spoon. We have uncovered devotion in service, humility in confession, and the truth that no gesture is too small when offered. From the heart, glasses were raised in a gentle toast, accompanied by the soft cry of the winter wind outside. Inside Chalmers' house, peace reigned, secured by honesty, sealed by compassion, and polished to a bright shine, like the silver teaspoon that once flew through the snow in a whisper of mischief, only to land safely in the hands of those who treasured both its history and its heart. Chapter 13. Frost Among the Flowers. A brittle dawn crept over Chalmers' house, the frost-laden branches of the roses crackling softly in the pale sunlight. Lady Winifred Chalmers wrapped her cloak tighter about her and hurried along the gravel path toward the greenhouse, where Mrs. Llewellyn's clipped voice had been heard in distress. Captain Hastings and Hercule Poirot followed close behind, the footprints of their boots fresh upon the frosty ground. As they approached, the greenhouse's glass panes revealed a chilling sight. Inside, the precious orchids and early lilacs wilted in silent anguish, their leaves mottled brown and edges curled. The steam pipes that normally hissed warmly along the back wall were cold, their valves frozen solid. A thin film of ice coated the central trough, and the humid warmth that should have nurtured these delicate blooms was gone. Mrs. Llewellyn, the head gardener, stood inside the door, her hands gloved in heavy leather. "Lady Chalmers, the heating failed overnight. I tried every valve, turned them, warmed them with my gloves, but no steam, no heat." Her voice trembled. "The auxiliary stove wouldn't light, and the fuel in the bin is damp. I fear the winter chill has crept in." Hastings stooped to examine the main heating pipe, tapping it gently with his gloved knuckles. "Not a hint of warmth, madame. The fire must have gone out, or been put out." Poirot stepped forward, cane in hand, his gaze sweeping the frozen tableau. "Madame Chalmers, this failure is too extensive to be mere misfortune. 5 feet of steam pipe, 2 stoves, and the fuel supply all neutralized. Such a concerted failure suggests deliberate action." Lady Chalmers caught her breath. "Sabotage? But who would attack the greenhouse?" "Someone who wishes to undermine your stewardship," Poirot replied, voice soft but steely. "By killing these young plants, the attacker hopes to force you into despair, perhaps to sell the estate as before." Mrs. Llewellyn's eyes filled. "All our winter graft ruined." "Fear not," Hastings said firmly. "We will restore the heat and save what we may." He beckoned Mrs. Llewellyn to show them the stove bin. Together they discovered that every coal briquette had been doused in water. "Deliberate," Hastings muttered. "No damp coal naturally does this much harm." Poirot nodded and moved to the door's threshold, where the lock plate bore a faint smudge of soot and grease. He turned to Lady Chalmers. "We have 3 clues. The valves frozen shut, the stove fuel rendered useless, and a trace on the door. Let us warm the valves and test their mechanism. Hastings, fetch the greenhouse lamp and flint. I shall see if the main firebox has been tampered." While Hastings lit the lamp, Poirot examined the valve handles. Beneath a thin crust of ice, he found fresh fingerprints. Small, slender, likely from a woman's gloved hand. He tapped the lock plate. "And here, the smear of soot suggests someone who handled the fuel and grew careless on the way out." "Lady," Chalmers shivered, hand to her throat. "But which of my household would do this? None have cause to harm the garden after last night's celebrations." Poirot's eyes glinted. "Madam, emotion can drive even the devoted to foolish extremes. Let us question Mrs. Smythe. She oversaw the pantry stove when the fuel was delivered." He turned to Mrs. Llewellyn. "Might you remind us of last night's deliveries? Who brought in the coal?" Mrs. Llewellyn frowned. "Young Phillips fetched the coal early, then Miss Carter, my assistant, stowed the bags. Mrs. Smythe let them into the greenhouse." Lady Chalmers's brow furrowed. "Miss Carter, but she is new and industrious. Mrs. Smythe, she has access to every key." Poirot tapped his cane. "We must speak with both. First, let us restore the heat. Hastings, stoke the firebox. Mrs. Smythe, please assist with the new fuel. Once warmth returns, we shall address questions of motive." An hour later, steam hissed along the pipes once more, and the greenhouse filled with a living mist. Mrs. Llewellyn wiped her brow and tucked a stray curl beneath her cap. The orchid straightened, and the lilacs seemed to draw breath. Lady Chalmers, Hastings and Poirot stood amid the humid glow. "Thank you, Monsieur Hastings," Lady Chalmers said, offering him a cup of steaming cocoa. "And you, Mrs. Smythe, for your help." She looked at the housemaid with gentle eyes. Mrs. Smythe curtsied. "I only wish to serve, madam." Poirot stepped forward, eyes narrowing ever so slightly. "Yet service can mask bitterness. I must ask Mrs. Smythe, did you notice anything unusual when you fetched the coal? Any hesitation from Miss Carter or the young Phillips?" Mrs. Smythe's cheeks coloured. Miss Carter complained of cold hands, and Phillips said his gloves were damp. But I thought little of it at the time. Hastings frowned. Damp gloves? Could they have leaned upon the valve handles? But that does not explain the coal. Poirot pressed on. "Mrs. Smythe, did you open the greenhouse door more than once last night?" The housemaid hesitated. "Only to check the saplings before bed, madam." Lady Chalmers exchanged a look with Hastings. "Might we consult Miss Carter and Meredith Phillips? We will gather them here presently." Poirot nodded. "Yes, and we shall review the logs for yesterday's tasks. Someone's routine was altered." Late that afternoon, in the library, Lady Chalmers summoned Miss Carter and Meredith Phillips. The young assistant and the gardener's apprentice stood respectfully before her Poirot, and Hastings. The snow outside drifted lazily, the garden forgotten for the moment. "Miss Carter," Lady Chalmers began, "you assisted in warming the greenhouse last night. Did you place briquettes in the stove bin?" Miss Carter's dark eyes darted to Phillips's pale face. I did, madam," she stammered, "but I found all the coal wet, so I fetched more from the stockroom." "And did you check the fuel upon fetching it?" Hastings asked gently. The girl swallowed. "I did not. I thought it strange, but believed the coal had absorbed moisture from the snow on the sacks." Poirot tapped his cane. "Meredith, you carried the sacks. Did you notice if the warehouse door stood ajar?" Phillips's gaze met Poirot's. "Yes, monsieur. I found the store door unlatched at dawn. He hesitated, tears brimming. "I locked it last night, but I returned to fetch a second lantern when Mrs. Smythe called me. In my haste, I forgot to relock." Mrs. Smythe's hands shook. I did ask him to guide me." Poirot's eyes glinted. So the door was left open for access to the coal, and a stranger could have entered the stockroom, dampening the fuel deliberately. Someone used our household members as unwitting accomplices. Lady Chalmers pressed her lips together. But who else could know of that store? Poirot's gaze fell upon Mrs. Smythe. "You knew of Meredith's return, and you followed him, on a pretext of needing more tea, and passed the open door. Did you notice anyone near the coal store?" Mrs. Smythe's eyes filled. "I saw the gardener's widow, Mrs. Jacobs, skulking near the side wing at midnight. She has lost her cottage to the floods and begged for more work. I thought she sought favour." Hastings's brow rose. "Mrs. Jacobs, she came to you for help, but she may have carried out a desperate plan." Lady Chalmers's voice wavered. "Mercy was granted, yet she repaid me with sabotage." Poirot nodded. Desperation can drive one to unwitting malice. Mrs. Jacobs believed that without heat the greenhouse saplings would die, and Lady Chalmers would be forced to sell off surplus lands she hoped to claim for a new worker's cottage. Entschuldigung, exhaled. A sad miscalculation. Lady Chalmers rose, her expression softening with compassion. "Fetch Mrs. Jacobs, Hastings, and hear her plea." Moments later, Mrs. Jacobs entered, her shawl damp and threadbare, her eyes wide with fear and regret. She knelt before Lady Chalmers. "Madame," she whispered, voice trembling, "I never wished harm. I thought if the seedlings were lost, you would turn to selling the surplus ground, and I begged for a cottage there. When the floods claimed my home, I despaired." Lady Chalmers placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "My dear Mrs. Jacobs, your suffering pains me, but your actions nearly destroyed the greenhouse and betrayed my trust." Tears glistened on Jacob's cheeks. "Please, I beg your forgiveness." Lady Chalmers glanced at Poirot. He inclined his head, eyes grave. "Madam, mercy once more reveals character." She turned to Jacobs. "You shall have your cottage, upon one condition. You will tend the new Rose children at my side, proving your devotion in service rather than sabotage." She placed a cloak around the woman's shoulders. "Rise, Mrs. Jacobs. Let us warm these saplings together." Hastings and Poirot exchanged smiles as Jacobs rose, relief flooding her countenance. Outside, steam hissed once more along the pipes. and in the greenhouse the frost melted from the leaves. The winter's chill remained, yet Chalmers House glowed with warmth, born of forgiveness and renewed bonds. As dusk settled and lanterns gleamed through the glass, Lady Chalmers paused beneath the rose arches, her breath clouding in the frosty air. Hastings joined her, and Poirot emerged from the greenhouse, his cane tapping a soft rhythm. "Madame," Poirot said, "in your garden of roses you have planted seeds of mercy. From frost and fear, loyalty and kindness have sprung." She smiled, hand clasping his, and from silence truth has bloomed. Together they watched the last light fade across the winter garden, comforted by the knowledge that Chalmers House, beneath its mended gate and warmed by many fires, would endure in peace and promise. Chapter 14. The Last Confession. A week had passed since the thaw in the greenhouse restored both roses and spirits, and Chalmers House wore the promise of midwinter, sunshine in its every window. Lady Winifred Chalmers found herself drawn, before breakfast, to the little oak desk in her father's study wing. There, beside her grandmother's sealed journals, lay a single sheet of cream paper, an envelope addressed in a familiar, trembling hand. No postmark graced its corner, only her own name in ink that had smudged at a crease. She broke the seal with a quiet breath and unfolded the letter. "My dearest Winifred, if you read this, my time for truth has come. I cannot rest knowing you bear the burden of secrets I alone should have carried. Meet me in the old garden chapel at dusk, and you will understand the final act of loyalty that binds your house. Forever in service, M.T. Lady Chalmers's pulse quickened at the initials. M.T. Maurice Tilney, the steward, trusted beyond all." She tucked the letter into her muff and sought out Captain Hastings in the breakfast room, where he arranged plates of kipper and brown toast. Upon reading, Hastings's brow darkened. "Madam," he said, setting aside a toast, "this summons from Maurice suggests one last secret. We must attend him at once, and with all the discretion the hour allows." Hastings fetched Hercule Poirot from the drawing-room, where the detective examined a collection of botanical sketches. Poirot's fine features brightened at the prospect of a new puzzle. "Mademoiselle Chalmers," he said, bowing, "your steward is a man of duty, yet he would not summon you thus for idle reflection. Let us prepare for a confessional twilight." As dusk settled, a grey veil of clouds drifted across the moon, and the east wing corridors glimmered under polished brass lamps. Lady Chalmers, Hastings, and Poirot made their way past the conservatories, frosted glass to the walled garden chapel, its ivy dead and leafless, its stone altar bare of adornment. Maurice Tilney stood waiting beneath a naked yew tree, hands folded, eyes downcast. "Madam," he greeted, voice thick with emotion, "thank you for coming." He motioned to a wooden bench beneath the chapel's arch. "I have wronged you in silence, and I cannot bear it a moment longer." Lady Chalmers placed a steadying hand on his arm. "Maurice, you have served my family with devotion. Speak freely." He drew in a shuddering breath. "It was I who altered the ledger entries after your cousin's betrayal, to conceal small discrepancies in household accounts. I feared you would blame Sir Reginald for every ill that befell us, from the poison tonic to the greenhouse sabotage. In my loyalty, I tampered with the records to spare your heart another sting. His gaze flicked to Hastings. "I moved funds from the maintenance account into repairs without your sanction. I accounted for them in ledgers that no one but I dared open." Hastings's eyes widened. "You misled Lady Chalmers to protect her. Yet such deception undermines trust more than any external threat." "Well," Maurice whispered, "I could not bear to see you distressed by my mistakes. I believed that if the house flourished, you would not notice the error beneath the surface." Poirot stepped forward, his cane tapping softly on the flagstones. "Monsieur Tilney, your intention was kind, yet it casts a long shadow. True loyalty demands truth, not concealment. You have risked the very trust you sought to protect." Maurice bowed his head in shame. "I know. I am prepared to face any consequence. I offer my resignation, knowing that my stewardship has failed you." Lady Chalmers's expression softened. "Maurice, you have guided this household through storms, both literal and figurative. Your concession speaks to your honour, even as your error demanded secrecy. I cannot accept your resignation, but I do require full transparency henceforth. Will you pledge to uphold truth in every entry and every action?" Maurice raised his eyes, glistening. "With all my heart, madame. No more secrets." The three walked back to the main house in silence, the yew branches whispering overhead. Hastings paused at the terrace door. "Madame, I trust that this final revelation closes the circle of mendacity in your home." Lady Chalmers nodded. "Maurice has my gratitude and my forgiveness. Let us restore the ledgers to accuracy and move forward." Poirot placed a hand on Hastings's coat sleeve. The heart of Chalmers House beats now in full measure of honesty. All that remains is proper restitution. That evening, in the oak-panelled library, Maurice and Lady Chalmers sat before the mahogany desk alongside Hastings and the head butler, Mr. Thompson. Under the steady glow of the brass lamp, Maurice produced the revised ledgers, each entry restored to its rightful place, each discrepancy explained in a covering note. Mr. Thompson verified the figures with clerical precision, nodding as each correction was affirmed. When the final page was signed, Lady Chalmers stood and extended her hand to Maurice. "Your candour has preserved what is most dear to us, the integrity of this home. I entrust you once more to steward these halls." Maurice grasped her hand, tears in his eyes. "I shall honour that trust for as long as I live." Hastings rose, offering a glass of claret to each. "Then let us toast to renewed loyalty, to final confessions, and to the Chalmers house that endures through honesty." Glasses chimed in that dignified room, the echoes warm amid the winter air. Poirot watched with satisfaction. Once again, a web of silence had given way to the bright light of truth. In the days that followed, the rose arches of the garden, now bare of bloom, seemed to whisper promises of spring. Inside the staff moved, with renewed confidence. Ledgers balanced, greenhouse vents steamed, and the winter supper fires glowed steadily in every hearth. Lady Chalmers, seated at her desk each morning, penned letters of thanks to her advisers, her handwriting sure and untroubled. One morning, as Hastings arrived for tea, he found Lady Chalmers standing before the East Wing portrait gallery. Among the stern ancestors, she paused at her grandmother's likeness, a gentle oval miniature of Margaret Chalmers, her face lit with determined compassion. Hastings joined her. "Ever kind, madame," he said softly. "Your grandmother would be proud." Lady Chalmers laid a hand upon the frame. Her silent courage guided me through trials far greater than frost or poison. Now, in winter's hush, I honour her by living as she taught, without secret or concealment. Hastings touched her arm. "And so does Chalmers House flourish." She looked at him, eyes bright. "Yes, Hastings, in honesty, mercy, and unwavering devotion." She turned and led him back to the library, the echo of their footsteps mingling with the promise of spring yet to come. Chapter 15. The feast of renewal, the great hall of Chalmers House, glowed in the soft light of 100 candles, their flickering flames reflecting off the polished oak beams and the crystal facets of the chandelier overhead. Outside, the early January night pressed against the mullioned windows, but within, warmth and laughter filled the air. Tonight was the feast of renewal, a celebration of the household's honesty restored, the gardens saved, and the bonds of trust renewed. Lady Winifred Chalmers entered the hall, her emerald velvet gown trailing modestly over the thick carpet. Captain Hastings stood at the foot of the dais, helping her into her place of honour beside Hercule Poirot. Mr. Thompson, the butler, and Mrs. Smythe, the housemaid, stood at attention behind them, while Maurice Tilney, reinstated steward, presided over the serving of the dishes with solemn pride. Mrs. Bryant, the seamstress, flitted among the tables, ensuring every guest's napkin was folded just so. The long tables were stacked with winter's bounty, bowls of steaming root vegetable soup, platters of roasted pheasant glazed with juniper berries, a centrepiece of stuffed boar's heads surrounded by sprigs of rosemary, and trays of crusted pies filled with kale and chestnuts. At intervals, candles burned in silver sconces, and lengths of holly were woven across the polished wood. The air was heavy with scents of cinnamon, clove, and roasting meats, a heady perfume that stirred appetites and spirits alike. As the serving began, Lady Chalmers raised her glass, a slender crystal goblet of spiced wine. "My friends," she began, voice ringing clear above the clatter of plates and rising murmur of conversation. "Tonight we gather not only to partake of this fine feast, but to honour the truth that has guided us through winter's trials. In this hall we have faced deception, forgiven folly, and restored our bonds. Let this feast be a testament to honesty, mercy, and the promise of new growth, even in the coldest season." A chorus of "Hear, hear" rose, and glasses were lifted in salute. Hastings offered a quiet smile to Poirot, whose little grey cells gleamed with satisfaction. The feast of renewal proceeded with jovial conversation and gentle music. A quartet of fiddles and flute played a spirited jig, and the staff and household members, gardener's apprentice Meredith, Phillips, Mrs. Llewellyn, and even the redeemed Sir Reginald Marley, joined in the merriment. The baronial table at the end, reserved for the most senior servants, was graced by Mr. Thompson's benign presence and Mrs. Smythe's beaming delight. Halfway through the meal, Lady Chalmers signalled for a brief pause. Slender waists of silver, candle-holders were lowered, and a hush fell. "Before we continue," she said, "I wish to acknowledge those whose courage and loyalty saved our garden, our greenhouse, and our very way of life. Maurice Tilney, whose final confession gave us the clarity to move forward. Mrs. Smythe and Mrs. Bryant, whose honesty and resourcefulness thwarted threats both inside and out, and Meredith Phillips, whose small acts of service remind us that the humblest among us can perform great deeds. Morris rose and offered a shy curtsy. Hastings tapped his glass to his lips. The assembled household erupted into applause, gentle, heartfelt, and sustained. As for Sir Reginald, Lady Chalmers continued, let us also recognise his labours in reviving the rose-beds and his willingness to atone. May his example remind us that renewal is possible for all. Sir Reginald, seated among the staff, nodded with quiet dignity. Hastings raised his own glass again, and the hall rang with cheers. When at last the dishes were cleared, Miss Carter, the parlour-maid, brought forth a large tureen of plum pudding, its surface gleaming with brandy and dotted with winter fruits. Children from the village, invited guests of the feast, sat in a long line at the side table, their eyes wide as the pudding was lit with a blue flame of brandy. Poirot watched the scene with gentle amusement. Then he rose and tapped his cane on the dais steps, commanding attention. "My lady, if I may," he said. Silence followed, broken only by the soft crackle of the hearth fire. We have uncovered broken latches, poisoned tonics, hidden chambers, and soggy coal. Yet tonight we celebrate the simplest truth, that honour and compassion triumph when guided by the little grey cells of the human heart. I propose a final toast to Lady Chalmers, whose steadfast resolve has shaped this happy night, and to the household of Chalmers House, whose loyalty and forgiveness have restored its radiant spirit. He raised his glass high. Hastings and Lady Chalmers followed, and the hall erupted in a jubilant, heartfelt cheer that echoed off the high rafters. When the music resumed, Lady Chalmers descended the dais and joined the dancing couples. Her laughter rang out as she spun beneath the chandelier, Hastings twirling her gently, Poirot smiling from the sidelines. Even Sir Reginald Marley, directed by Mrs. Smythe, managed a graceful promenade with Mrs. Bryant. Their steps are silent. Apology turned celebration. As the evening waned, the last candle flickered low, and the guests drifted to the door, bidding farewell to the enchantment of the Feast of Renewal. In the great hall, only Lady Chalmers, Hastings, Poirot, and the loyal servants remained, lingering amid the emptied platters and rosemary-scented air. Lady Chalmers placed a hand on each of her companions. "Thank you, all of you. In honesty, we have found mercy. In mercy, we have found strength. And in strength, we have found each other." Poirot touched his cane-tip to the floor. "Mon ami, your home stands secure once more, its heart as warm as the fire that lights our way." Hastings clasped Lady Chalmers's hand, and I dare say our hearts are warmed as well. Together they extinguished the last candle, leaving the hall to the soft glow of the embers. Outside the winter night stretched on, silent and deep, but within Chalmers House unity and promise shone brighter than any star, sealed by the feast of renewal and the enduring bonds of truth and love. Chapter 16. The Garden's Last Promise. First pale light of morning crept through the frost-covered windows of Chalmers House, illuminating the grand oak hall in soft silvery beams. Lady Winifred Chalmers stood at the threshold of the winter garden, her breath forming little clouds in the chill air. Behind her, Captain Hastings and Hercule Poirot emerged from the corridor, their boots clearing snow from the threshold. Each carried the sense of expectancy that comes before a long-anticipated revelation, a final turning in the story of Chalmers House. "This morning," Lady Chalmers said, her voice steady though her heart fluttered, "we follow the last thread of my grandmother's journals. There remains one promise she spoke of, a gift she set aside for a season when clarity and courage would be needed. I believe that season has arrived." Poirot inclined his head. "Madame, you speak of a promise kept in silence, a rose seed hidden until the proper time. Let us retrieve this gift, and so bring your grandmother's foresight to fruition." Hastings braced himself against the cold, and I shall stand guard, should any unmannerly intruder still lurk beneath these yews. They passed beneath the great arch of holly, stepping into the walled garden where winter's hush lay deep upon the rose-beds. The snow lay in gentle drifts, each rose cane encased in frost like crystal sculptures. At the far corner, beneath an ancient yew, stood the small stone sundial, a familiar meeting place for many moments of reflection, but now deserted and waiting. Lady Chalmers approached the sundial, her skirts sweeping across the snow. She knelt to brush aside a thin coverlet of ice from a section of ground just beneath the pedestal. Hastings joined her, and together they uncovered a small iron box, its surface mottled with age, and its lock engraved with the rose and falcon crest borrowed from family silver. Poirot stepped forward, offering his gloves. "Permit me, madame." He drew a slender key from his coat pocket, one he had pried from the secret chamber's chest weeks ago. With gentle precision, he turned the key in the box's lock. The lid creaked, and within lay a single velvet pouch and an unfolded letter, penned in a hand Lady Chalmers recognized instantly. She lifted the letter with trembling fingers. "My dearest descendant, if you have found this box, then you have proven that truth and loyalty endure beyond the perils of deceit and frost. Inside the pouch lies the seed of a rose bred for winter bloom, a symbol that hope awakens even in the darkest season. Plant it in the first thaw, and tend it with faith, that its blossom may remind you always of renewal. Your loving grandmother, Margaret Chalmers Lady." Chalmers's eyes glistened. She opened the velvet pouch to reveal the tiniest seed, black as night and glistening with promise. Hastings and Poirot exchanged glances, one of awe, one of satisfaction. "So this is the promise," Hastings whispered. "A seed that blooms in winter. Can such a rose exist?" Lady Chalmers pressed the seed between her fingers. "My grandmother believed it could, bred through generations of careful graft, hardy, resilient, flowering against all odds." She rose, tucking the seed in her pocket. "We shall plant it at the first sign of spring in the heart of the rose garden." Poirot nodded. "A fitting culmination, madame. As this rose blooms in defiance of winter's hold, so does Chalmers House stand against fear and betrayal, rooted in honour." He tapped his cane twice on the snowy ground. "Now, shall we return indoors for a final breakfast before the day's work begins?" Inside the great hall, Mrs. Smythe and Mrs. Bryant bustled about the long dining table, laying out trays of kipper, porridge, and fresh fruit. The hearth's fire roared cheerfully, stamping out any lingering winter's chill. Lady Chalmers took her seat at the head of the table, flanked by Hastings and Poirot, while the rest of the household gathered in respectful order. Maurice Tilney, reinstated steward, approached with a covered silver platter. "Madame, your morning meal," he announced, lifting the lid to reveal eggs poached in herb-infused water, accompanied by trout smoked overnight. The fragrant steam perfumed the room. Lady Chalmers allowed herself a small laugh of delight. "Thank you, Maurice. Your skill in the kitchen rivals your care in the ledgers." She offered him an encouraging smile. "We are all grateful for your restored stewardship." Maurice bowed, his face alight with relief. "I shall continue to serve with honesty, madam." As breakfast proceeded, conversation turned to plans for the coming weeks, preparations for the Foundation's spring scholarships, the repair of the West Wing roof, and the reopening of the East Library for scholars. Yet beneath these practical topics lay a quiet undercurrent of renewed confidence. Chalmers House had weathered storms of poison, sabotage, and betrayal. Now it thrived on solidarity. Hastings raised his cup in a gentle toast. To Lady Chalmers's grandmother, whose foresight saved this estate, and to her descendant, who honours that legacy with each step. Glasses chimed, and Lady Chalmers felt warmth bloom in her chest, an echo of something she could not yet name, but recognised as the seed of hope. Later that morning, Hastings and Poirot joined Lady Chalmers in the rose garden, bundled in woolens and scarves to shield against the cutting wind. The sundial remained as they had left it, its flagstone face cleared of snow, the small iron box absent from beneath its pedestal. Lady Chalmers knelt once more and brushed the ground smooth. She withdrew the seed from her pocket and held it aloft, as though offering it to winter's sky. "Mother," she whispered, "I plant your promise here, between two living roses that weather the frost. May they welcome this new child into our family's story." With care, she placed the seed in the shallow hole and covered it with the garden's friable earth. Hastings gently pressed the ground firm, and Poirot tapped the spot with his cane. In the hush, a single petal fluttered from a nearby wild rose, drifting to rest upon the freshly planted patch, an unbidden benediction. As they stood, the cold wind stilled, and winter's pale light seemed to linger a moment longer on the roses. Lady Chalmers stepped back, resting a hand on Hastings's arm. "Thank you both," she said softly, "for guiding me through winter's dark, and for reminding me that faith, like a rose seed, can lie buried until the warmth of truth calls it forth." Poirot inclined his head. "Madame, the gardens and the world are richer for your courage, and when the first blossom appears, you will know that the promise of renewal has been fulfilled." With that, they returned to the house, their footprints trailing behind them in the crisp snow. In the days to come, the seed would slumber beneath the frozen soil, waiting for the sun's return. And in Chalmers House, hearts warmed by honesty and mercy would await the first green shoot of hope, and the final bloom of the garden's last promise. Chapter 17. Spring's First Blossom. First tentative blush of spring stirred the rose garden at Chalmers House, tender green shoots pushing through the thawing earth. Lady Winifred Chalmers, wrapped in a light wool shawl, moved among the beds before breakfast, her gloved fingers brushing each emerging bud. She paused at the spot where her grandmother's seed had lain through frosts and snows, and there, against every expectation, sprouted a single delicate green shoot, tipped with the faintest hint of pink. A gasp of joy escaped her, and she ran to summon Captain Hastings and Hercule Poirot. Hastings joined her within moments, cane in hand, eyes alight. "Madame, it truly lives!" he exclaimed. He knelt to examine the shoot, tracing its slender stem. A rare rose indeed. Poirot soon appeared, his gait measured, his eyes gleaming with delight. He bent to inspect the sprout. "Mon ami," he said softly, "your grandmother's promise has blossomed at last. This first sign of life embodies the renewal we have sought through winter's trials." Lady Chalmers pressed her gloved hand to her heart. "I am overwhelmed. Through poison plots, hidden vaults, and shattered trust, we have emerged to this moment of hope." She turned to Hastings. "Let us prepare the garden gate for our spring fete, to celebrate this first bloom." That afternoon, the household gathered in the great hall to plan the spring's first blossom celebration. Mrs. Smythe, the housemaid, and Mrs. Bryant, the seamstress, sketched banners of pale rose and green linen, while Maurice Tilney arranged invitations for guests from the village and neighbouring estates. Meredith Phillips, the gardener's apprentice, brought in fresh soil and fertilizer for the new shoot, his face shining with pride. Lady Chalmers stood before the group, her voice warm. "Friends, through your loyalty and toil, we have preserved this house and its garden. Now, we gather to honour not only our own renewal, but the promise of community and growth. Let our fate announce to all that Chalmers House stands open and flourishing." Hastings raised a hand. "And Monsieur Poirot will be our guest of honour, unveiling the first rose in person." Poirot bowed, moustache twitching in amusement. "As I shall be most honoured to witness your grandmother's legacy, and to partake of the festivities." Cheers rose in the hall, the household spirits bright as spring sunlight. On the morning of the fete, the rose garden glowed with new life. Pale blossoms unfurled on English hybrids, and the lone winter rose stood proud among them, its bud a promise fulfilled. Guests arrived in carriages, stepping onto the gravel paths lined with hyacinths and early tulips. Villagers, schoolchildren, and friends of Lady Chalmers, among them Reverend Clara Vaughan and Dr. Sinclair, gathered beneath silk canopies. Lady Chalmers, in a gown of fresh leaf green, greeted each with warmth. Hastings assisted her from carriage to terrace, and Poirot, resplendent in morning dress, held the lantern that would light the unveiling. Maurice saw that silver trays of petit fours and lavender lemonade were distributed, while Mrs. Smythe and Mrs. Bryant guided children in placing petals along the winding paths. At the stroke of 11, Lady Chalmers stepped to the pavilion, where the single winter rose, now fully open, glowed with shy perfection. A hush fell as she held the lantern. Aloft, Poirot approached, his cane tapping, and Hastings stood at her side. "My friends," Lady Chalmers began, voice clear, "today we reveal the first blossom of the season, a rose born of winter's promise. Let its flower remind us that through cold and trial, hope endures. I present to you the winter rose of Chalmers House." She lifted the lantern to illuminate the pale bloom. Gasps of wonder rippled through the assembly as the rose's petals caught the light, revealing soft pink veins against ivory. Reverend Vaughan crossed herself. Children clapped in delight. Poirot smiled broadly. "Madame, this rose is more than a flower. It is a testament to faith rewarded, to truth triumphant, and to the human spirit's resilience." Dr. Sinclair stepped forward. "May this rose guide our work at the orphanage, where seeds of kindness are sown in young hearts." Chalmers nodded, moist-eyed. "Indeed, and now let the celebration begin." The fete unfolded in joyous vigour. Musicians played lively reels, villagers danced upon the lawn, and tables groaned under springtime fare. Fresh breads, soft cheeses, quiches of nettle and spinach, trays of strawberries and cream. Lady Chalmers moved among her guests, offering laughter and gracious conversation. Hastings reclined under a blossoming archway, recounting tales of past mysteries, and Poirot, ever the elegant host, ensured each guest felt the warmth of renewal. Near the garden's edge, Meredith Phillips tended the winter rose, misting its petals gently and whispering congratulations. Mrs. Llewellyn, the head gardener, stood beside him, beaming. "A miracle, isn't it?" she said softly. Meredith nodded. "My lady's trust and all our care made it possible." As afternoon light softened toward dusk, Lady Chalmers convened her household for one final gathering. Under the pavilion, with Hastings and Poirot at her side, she raised a glass of sparkling elderflower wine. "To renewal," she toasted, "to the winter rose, and to all who proved that truth and loyalty can conquer the darkest season." Glasses chimed in unison, the soft sound echoing like the promise of spring. Poirot closed his eyes, savouring the moment. Hastings smiled at Lady Chalmers, who returned his gaze with gratitude and joy. In that closing hour, Chalmers House stood as a living testament. Winter had given way to spring. Secrets had yielded to trust, and a single rose had bloomed against all odds. And as the wintry twilight settled over the gardens, the promise of renewal, once buried in silence, flourished in every heart and every petal. Chapter 18. The eternal garden spring's fullest light bathed Chalmers House in a glow of blossoming hope, petals drifting down like gentle snowfall across the terraces and lawns. Lady Winifred Chalmers stood at the head of the marble staircase, gazing out over the sea of roses now in riotous bloom. English climbers, hybrid teas, the rare winter rose perched in its special bed, and innumerable varieties that whispered of seasons past and those yet to come. Behind her, Captain Hastings and Hercule Poirot shared her pride, their silhouettes outlined by the rose-draped archway. "Madame," Hastings said, tipping his hat, "the gardens are more splendid than ever." His gaze swept the labyrinth of paths, each lined with fresh shrubs and buzzing with bees at their labour. Winifred's smile was serene. "They are the living legacy of so many trials, and of the kindness and courage that saw us through. Every bloom tells a story." Poirot, perched on the lower step, allowed his eyes to rest on the splendour before him. "Indeed, madame, but this too is but a chapter. The true measure of a garden and of a home is how it endures in the hearts of those who tend it." As they spoke, the first carriage of guests arrived for the inauguration of the newly built orangerie, a glass pavilion where tender citrus trees and exotic specimens would flourish under Chalmers House's protection. Among the invited were villagers, trustees of the Mortimer Foundation, children from the orphanage, and a select company of neighbours and friends. Reverend Clara Vaughan led the procession in prayer. Dr. Sinclair blessed the orangery's threshold, and Mr. Green read a poem celebrating renewal and stewardship. When the ribbon of satin was cut, laughter and cheers filled the morning air. The guests streamed inside to admire the sparkling glass interior, where potted orange and lemon trees stood in neat rows, their branches heavy with fruit. Lady Chalmers guided them through, her hand on a silver ladle that would serve the first cups of fresh squeezed orange cordial, a welcome taste of sunlit days ahead. After the ceremony, gatherings formed beneath the shade of magnolias and laburnum. Guests sipped lemonade and discussed the summer to come. New school scholarships, support for the orphanage's expanded programs, and community projects to restore the old chapel at the village green. Lady Chalmers moved among them, her gentle presence a beacon of confidence and generosity. In a quiet corner of the garden, Hastings and Poirot found a moment for reflection. Hastings leaned against the balustrade, cane hooked over his arm. "You know, mon ami, I never thought we'd see so many happy faces here after those dark nights of poison and secrecy." Poirot's moustaches twitched in a wry smile. "Human nature is complex, Hastings. We have discovered its depths of malice and the heights of compassion. But the greatest triumph is to choose compassion in spite of malice." Their conversation was interrupted by Meredith Phillips bounding toward them, a small trowel in hand and dirt-streaked gloves. "Captain, Monsieur Poirot, you must see, another bud has opened on the winter rose." He led them back to its bed, where its pale petals quivered in the breeze. "Perfetto!" Poirot exclaimed softly. "Another blossom against the odds." He turned to Lady Chalmers, who had followed at Meredith's quick heels. "Madame, the rose has given us one more gift, the promise that even the rarest hope can flourish." She knelt beside the plant, brushing her fingertips over its soft petals. "I shall press this blossom into a book," she said, "that its memory may live forever." As the sun began its descent, the gardens took on the subdued gold of early evening. Lanterns were lit along the main path, and long tables were prepared for a farewell supper beneath the orangery's glass roof. Strings of electric lights twinkled overhead, mimicking the stars soon to emerge. At the table's head, Lady Chalmers rose to speak, her companions flanking her, as they had so many times before. "My friends," she began, voice rich with gratitude, "we have travelled a long road from winter's perils to spring's promise. Through betrayal, deception, and sorrow, we stood together, guided by truth, mercy, and unwavering resolve. Tonight, we celebrate not only the garden's renewal, but the unbreakable bonds that bind us as family and community." She raised her glass of rose-infused wine. "To each of you, trustee, servant, neighbour, and friend, whose devotion has kept this house and its gardens alive. May Chalmers House continue to bloom in all seasons, a sanctuary for truth and compassion." Glasses chimed, and an undercurrent of goodwill rippled through the assembled company. The first toast surrendered to laughter and the gentle murmur of shared stories. Plates were filled with roasted spring lamb, fresh asparagus, and delicate quiches of wild garlic, while servers offered dainty pastries and elderflower tarts. As the evening wound on, lantern light melted into lamplight, and lamplight into the flicker of candles. The air carried the scent of orange blossoms and jasmine from the orangery, mingling with the cool breath of the dusk. Under the glass dome, friends and staff danced to a string quartet's lilting waltz, couples gliding across the marble floor as the gardeners drifted off to the side, smiling at the spectacle their work had wrought. In that joyful revel, Lady Chalmers found herself drawn once more to the bench beneath the old yew tree. Hastings joined her, and Poirot lingered at a respectful distance, pipe in hand. "This," Winifred said softly, "is the life my grandmother dreamed for her seed, a yew rose blooming under glass, protected and nurtured, drawing a community together." Hastings offered her his coat. "Your grandmother would be proud of the harvest you have reaped." She nodded, eyes shining. "She sowed more than a garden. She sowed hope." She looked to Poirot. "Thank you, Hercule, for guiding me to this day." Poirot inclined his head, his little grey cells at rest. "Mon plaisir, madame. You have been the truest partner in this tale." He paused, surveying the hall of dancing figures. And now the story turns from mystery to joy, a rare and precious conclusion. Under the sparkling dome of the orangery and the silent watch of 1,000 stars, Chalmers House stood at peace. The roses bloomed, the oranges ripened, and the laughter of friends and family filled the spring air. In hearts warmed by honesty and mercy, the promise of renewal would endure forever, rooted in truth, blossoming in compassion, and flourishing in the eternal garden of hope.